Welcome back to the Drowsy Historian, where sleep meets the raw, uncomfortable, and often downright ridiculous truths of the past. Tonight we're travelling to a place that smells faintly of garlic, goat manure, and suspicion. A medieval Italian village. Before you drift off, ask yourself this. Could you survive a single sunrise in a town where gossip travelled faster than disease, where cheese was currency, and where your neighbour might bless you one day and accuse you of witchcraft the next? If you think modern village life is slow, quiet and peaceful, think again. The rooster didn't care if you'd only slept 4 hours. It crowed anyway, its hoarse screech bouncing off stone walls, waking dogs, children, and the man next door who snored like a broken bellows. Welcome to your new home, a cramped, smoky, medieval Italian village. The year? Somewhere in the 1300s. The amenities? Limited. The attitude? Suspicious. And the smell? Unavoidable. As dawn creeps over the tiled rooftops, the whole village doesn't so much rise as it groans to life. There's no gentle, "good morning" here. You wake up on a lumpy straw mattress. If you're lucky enough to own one, most just roll off a wooden plank or the packed dirt floor. The chill hits your bones before your eyes open. Firewood is scarce, and insulation is what you call a second tunic. Now, meet Elena, a baker's daughter with calloused hands and the sharpest tongue on her street. She's already hauling sacks of grain while muttering prayers and insults in the same breath. Beside her, her uncle Giacomo, a failed monk, turned candlemaker, lights his morning pipe with the solemnity of a priest performing last rites. These two will help us peek through this village's dirty windows and find out just how quaint daily life really was. The village piazza is the heart of everything. It's where shoes are worn out, secrets are spilled, and justice is occasionally improvised. It's also the only place where the cobblestones have been polished, not by design, but by centuries of trudging feet, spilled soup, and animal waste. You'll step around puddles and piles that are best left unidentified. Critically speaking, the so-called charm of village life wears off faster than yesterday's gruel. The buildings lean like old men, and the air always carries a tinge of smoke, pig, and regret. Windows are tiny, mostly to avoid paying the glass tax, and sunlight struggles to penetrate homes designed more for defense than comfort. The concept of privacy? Non-existent. If someone coughs across the alley, you'll know what kind of phlegm they coughed up, how often, and whether their aunt thinks it's serious. And speaking of health, do you feel that tickle in your throat? Might be the soot, might be the Black Death. Either way, good luck finding a physician who won't bleed you or prescribe ground beetle paste. The church bells ring out as the sky pinks. It's not just spiritual. Bells were basically your medieval scheduling app. Ring once for morning mass, twice for market setup, 3 times if someone's been excommunicated, or worse, stole cheese. Everyone listens because time is a shared concept and watches don't exist. Time is measured in shadows and stomach growls. Now back to Elena. She's elbow deep in dough, the flour coating her arms like a knight's armour. She works fast, not out of joy, but necessity. Bread isn't a luxury, it's survival, and her family owes half a cart of it in taxes to the local baron. Yes, taxes. Because nothing says freedom like surrendering half your livelihood to a man who's never touched mud. Meanwhile, Giacomo smirks from his corner. He's seen it all. Once banished from a monastery for drinking the sacramental wine, he's now a semi-respected wax merchant. He knows everyone's business and isn't above trading a candle for gossip. He watches the village wake with the knowing eyes of someone who pretends he doesn't care, while recording everything in memory like a village historian with better lighting. Let's take a detour to water. A resource so important, it has its own politics. Most villages fetch their daily supply from a communal well in the square. The rich, of course, have private cisterns. You wait in line, jug on head, praying the boy in front of you doesn't sneeze directly into the basin, and may the saints protect you if you spill a drop. Water's not just precious, it's watched. Spill it, and 4 old women will report you before the splash hits the ground. Now here's an inconvenient truth. Bathing? Rare. Soap? Pricier than wine. Cleanliness is next to godliness, but in this village, godliness isn't exactly common. People smell. You will smell. And eventually, your nose will give up. Despite the filth and fatigue, there's rhythm here. A system. A strangely coordinated chaos. The blacksmith pounds away at his forge, the butcher sharpens knives that have never known proper sanitation, and the children, barefoot and shrieking, play with sticks that somehow double as swords, walking canes, and disciplinary tools depending on who's holding them. But don't be fooled. Life here isn't rustic peace, it's survival with a scenic backdrop. The hills might look poetic at sunset, but they hide wolves, bandits, and unpaid taxes. And the people? They smile, yes, but they also judge, always. Alina knows it. That's why her braids are tight and her apron spotless. Appearances matter. A wrinkle in your shirt might invite whispers of sloth, or worse, heresy. As the village fully wakes, so do its expectations. There's no room for laziness. The moment your shadow hits the cobblestones, you're someone's employee, debtor, or disappointment. Even the pigeons have work to do, usually pooping on important notices posted outside the chapel. So yes, the medieval Italian village had its charm. But that charm came with lice, paranoia, a daily risk of food poisoning, and the constant fear that your neighbour might accuse you of being a witch because you grew parsley too fast. And it's only 7:30 a.m. Now that the sun is high enough to blind you when you squint up at the chapel's crooked bell tower, the village is fully alive. Not in a joyful, music in the streets way more, like the kind of life you see in an anthill you've just poked with a stick. Everyone is scrambling. There's always something to do, always someone shouting, always a reason to move faster than your legs want to. Let's follow Elena again. She's already finished her third batch of bread, dusted her skirt twice with the same dirty rag, and is now yelling at a boy who tried to snatch a loaf off her cooling rack. Theft, by the way, is almost expected here. Not because people are inherently evil, but because they're hungry. And when half the village survives on lentils and hope, a warm crust of bread is practically gold. Meanwhile, Giacomo, the unofficial village commentator, is leaning against the edge of a barrel, watching the street with narrowed eyes. He takes long drags from his pipe like it's a job. He occasionally offers unsolicited advice like, don't trust anyone who eats pears in winter. Or, if the rats are heading east, you should too. No one listens, but everyone hears him. By mid-morning, the air in the piazza thickens, not just from the heat, but from the accumulation of sweat, smoke, and shouts. You'd think the smell might fade with the breeze, but medieval Italian breezes are more poetic in literature than in practice. Most just shuffle the stench from one street to the next. Let's talk food. A loaded subject, mostly because it's rarely enough. A typical breakfast? If you're lucky, old bread soaked in watered-down wine, maybe a fig if it didn't rot in the cellar. Protein? A dream. Fresh fruit? Only in paintings. The village's wealthiest families might enjoy eggs or cheese, but for most, meals are a ritual in disappointment. Elena, though, has mastered the art of stretching thin ingredients. She could feed 5 mouths with what you'd call scraps, and still manage to keep her apron whiter than your conscience. But food isn't just about eating, it's a status symbol. If you can afford spices, you're practically royalty. If you can name more than 2 spices, people might suspect you of witchcraft. Salt is taxed. Pepper is priced like jewelry. And saffron? Only nobles, or those pretending to be. There's something unspoken about hunger in this village. It follows people like a second shadow. The poor are always chewing, always hoarding, always hoping. But the rich, they flaunt fullness. They let meat drip onto silver plates just to watch peasants salivate. It's not just sustenance, it's spectacle. And while we're on the subject of spectacle, let's briefly mention fashion. If you've ever dreamed of medieval elegance, think again. Most people wear the same outfit for weeks, sometimes months. Clothes aren't thrown away, they're patched until the fabric itself forgets its original colour. Dye is expensive, buttons are rare, and shoes, actual shoes, are a sign of stability. Children run barefoot. Adults wear sandals made of wood, rope, or whatever dyed recently. Elena wears a faded blue dress with hems she stitched herself. It's practical, modest, and stained in ways that suggest both flower and frustration. Giacomo, on the other hand, wears layers that make no sense. probably inherited from 3 dead cousins, and a belt pouch stuffed with useless trinkets, like a tooth that isn't his. Critically speaking, let's not romanticize this. Yes, there's tradition. Yes, there's routine. But there's also a relentless pressure to appear useful all the time. Even when you're resting, you should look like you're preparing to work. Laziness isn't just frowned upon, it's seen as a moral failing. Sit still too long, and someone might hand you a rake or accuse you of plotting something. Even children aren't spared. By age 6, they're expected to help, whether it's turning the spit over the fire or shooing geese out of the grain stores. Childhood, as we know it, doesn't exist here. You're either small and working, or small and in the way. And don't be misled by the peaceful sound of a lute drifting from some balcony. That's not leisure. It's a street performer hoping for scraps. Music is work. Art is work. Rest? That's for the dead or the clergy. And let's not even start on the clergy. Oh yes, they walk the streets with their polished shoes and well-fed bellies, blessing babies and condemning behaviour they themselves are often guilty of. They're respected, sure, but also feared. One word from the priest could turn rumour into judgment. And once you're judged, well, good luck finding a friend who'll risk being seen talking to you. Now, here's something both dark and fascinating. Public shaming. This village doesn't bother with subtle punishments. If you steal, you're whipped in the piazza. If you lie, you might wear a donkey mask and parade through the streets. One poor woman, Elena's distant cousin, was forced to carry a dead chicken on her head for an entire day because someone accused her of feeding bread to her cat during Lent. Was it true? No one knows. That's not the point. The point was spectacle, fear, control. But despite all of this, people endure. Somehow, the village moves in a rhythm that keeps even the most hopeless souls tethered to some purpose. Maybe it's survival instinct. Maybe it's faith. Maybe it's just the knowledge that your misery is shared by everyone around you, and that's oddly comforting. By the time the noon bell rings, Elena is wiping her forehead with the inside of her sleeve, squinting toward the sun, and already thinking about dinner, which, mind you, will be nearly identical to breakfast. Giacomo scratches his beard, leans into the shade, and starts crafting a tale about a ghost he definitely saw in the wine cellar. And so, the village rolls on, buzzing, sweating, gossiping, judging. All beneath the illusion of tranquility, tourists centuries later will foolishly romanticize. Chapter 2, Bread, Blood and Barter. A day at the market. It's market day. That means 2 things, chaos and opportunity. The piazza, which only yesterday hosted gossiping widows and drunken arguments about taxes, has transformed into a temporary circus of commerce, smells, shouting and sweat. If you're lucky, you might walk away with a hunk of cheese. If you're unlucky, you might walk away with fleas, a bruised rib, and a mild case of food poisoning. Most walk away with all 3. The stalls begin popping up like mushrooms before dawn. Merchants arrive from neighbouring villages with carts that creak like dying oxen. They set up crooked wooden tables held together by twine, prayer, and the misplaced hope that no one will lean too hard on them. They lay out their goods: vegetables, fabrics, salted fish, herbs, goat meat still buzzing with flies, and immediately begin yelling. Because yelling in a medieval marketplace is not rude, it's survival. Elena has arrived with her mother, lugging a basket filled with dense, dark bread. Not the fluffy kind you're used to. This bread could double as a weapon. It's meant to last a week, and probably will, mostly because it takes a full set of teeth and sheer determination to chew through it. But it's still valuable. People will trade for it. And trade is the name of the game. Forget coins. Barter is how most business is done. A length of cloth for a jar of honey. 3 onions for a duck egg. A favour owed in return for a candle stub. And just like that, you're part of an invisible economy where debt is tracked by memory, shame and threats. Giacomo, of course, is already there. He's not buying anything. He's watching, because this is where real village politics plays out. Let's talk about haggling, an art form in itself. It's not just negotiation, it's theatre. A good buyer will groan, squint, gesture dramatically, and list their current misfortunes as reasons for a lower price. A good seller will scoff, invoke the saints, and suggest that any less would starve their children. Lies flow freely, but everyone's in on it. No one expects honesty, only a fair performance. And the insults. Oh, the insults are exquisite. Subtle, layered, and completely unnecessary. A woman might call another's cheese courageously pungent, which really means it smells like rot and betrayal. A man might remark on the unique texture of someone's apples translation. These would kill a mule if thrown hard enough. Let's take a moment for the butcher's stall, a popular pungent corner of the market. The butcher's name is Marco, and he smiles with the confidence of someone who knows you need him more than he needs you. His apron is stained permanently, and his knife is always in motion, chopping, slicing, or threatening a boy who tried to sneak a bone. Nothing is wasted, not even the squeal of the pig. Every part of the animal gets sold, ears, hooves, guts, and if you ask too many questions about what's in the sausage, you clearly don't deserve any. And then there's the fishmonger. Now, this village is miles from the coast, so you can imagine what the fish looks like after 2 days of transport in a wooden cart with no ice. It's more mummified than fresh, but no one dares say it aloud. The fishmonger is a large, sweaty man who speaks softly but carries a club. He insists his wares are blessed by salt and preserved by sea wind. The truth? They're preserved by denial. Critically, the market reveals one of medieval life's darkest truths. Desperation sells. People aren't buying what they want. They're buying what they can barely afford to live with. And when you only have 3 coins to your name and your child hasn't had meat in a month, you'll buy that bruised apple and call it divine providence. There's a dark rhythm to the marketplace. It's noisy, yes, but organised in its own strange way. The old men gather by the wine barrels pretending to argue about trade routes while secretly spying on women. The beggars stake their corners early, armed with hollow eyes and well-rehearsed pleas. The pickpockets move like dancers, fast, invisible, and always one step ahead of justice. Speaking of which, justice does occasionally visit the market square. Today, the constable drags in a young man accused of watering down his wine. The crowd watches as he's tied to the punishment post, publicly lashed while his mother sobs nearby. Giacomo mutters something about it being good branding. The butcher nods and offers the constable a pork shoulder at half price. Business, as they say, continues. Now let's talk clothing again. On market day, villagers wear their best, or what used to be their best. Elena's dress has been brushed and rehemmed. Her mother wears a shawl passed down 3 generations, smelling faintly of rosemary and regret. The rich wear layers dyed in colours the poor can't pronounce. Blues, greens, golds, all loud symbols of money and status. Fabrics rustle as they pass, like whispers of superiority, and yet even they bargain, because nobility doesn't mean foolishness. A discount is a discount. And of course, there's religion. The priest always strolls through late in the morning, flanked by 2 altar boys and an air of exaggerated humility. He blesses stalls, sprinkles water no one asked for, and reminds everyone that the Lord sees all, especially unpaid tithes. Strangely, his basket is always filled with the finest goods by day's end. Divine intervention? Maybe. Strategic guilt? Definitely. Now, in a quiet corner of the square, an old woman sells herbs and potions. She's not technically a healer, nor a witch, though depending on who's asking, she might be both. Her wares include dried lavender, crushed beetle shells, and a suspicious brown powder she claims cures anything from backaches to curses. Elena buys some mint from her, just enough to freshen breath and ward off evil glances. But let's not pretend the market is all fun. Fights break out. Babies cry. goods are stolen, and behind every smiling merchant is the pressure of survival. Some will go home with coin, some with blisters, and some, like the fishmonger, with the same fish they arrived with, only smellier. By midday, the sun is cruel and the crowds are thinning. Elena has sold half her bread, bartered the rest for onions, and narrowly avoided a shouting match with a noblewoman's maid who accused her of blocking the path. Giacomo is sipping weak wine from a chipped cup, laughing to himself, and watching the pigeons peck at crumbs of cheese no one claimed. The market winds down. The shouting fades. The stalls begin to creak again, only this time in retreat. But the tension never really leaves, because market day isn't about joy. It's about scraping by, about getting just enough to last another few days, and pretending that maybe, next time, you'll get a better deal. By late afternoon, the marketplace has entered what villagers call the bargain hour, though it's really just a polite way of saying everything is either half price or half rotten. This is when things get interesting. The noble buyers have retreated to shaded courtyards. The merchants, now sunburned and cranky, are trying to unload the rest of their goods before the flies win. And the peasants? They're back for round 2 eyes, scanning for leftovers, ears sharp for desperation in a merchant's voice. Elena stands at her stall with 2 loaves of bread left. She knows she won't sell them. Not now. Not with the villagers' stomachs mostly filled and their coin purses emptied. Still, she waits. It's not about the money anymore, it's about the performance. If she packs up too early, she looks like she failed. If she stays a little longer, people might assume her bread is too expensive, not unwanted. Image matters, even when you're broke. Meanwhile, Giacomo leans against the chapel's shadowed wall, chewing on what might be a dried fig, or just a lump of hardened syrup pretending to be one. He watches the market's quiet unravelling, like a man enjoying the last act of a tragedy he's already seen 100 times. A couple nearby haggles over a cracked pot. A boy gets smacked for breaking a turnip. A dog limps past dragging a stolen sausage. It's the usual opera of misfortune, played in sandals and patched tunics. Now, let's talk medicine, or rather, what passes for it here. There's a man selling dried lizards ground into powder, said to cure coughing and marital problems. Next to him, a woman offers snail mucus for skin rashes. One stall displays a jar of preserved rat tails labelled "for luck." In a village where most ailments are blamed on cold air or sin, anything goes. But if you get really sick bleeding gums, swelling, fever, your options shrink fast. The village priest might bless you and suggest a pilgrimage. The barber surgeon will happily bleed you with a blade he hasn't cleaned since St. Augustine was alive. And if all else fails, someone will wrap you in garlic and hope the smell drives the sickness out, or at least keeps the neighbours from catching it. Now imagine trying to barter for help. I'll give you this chicken if you remove my boil. It happens more often than you'd think. Pain and poultry in constant negotiation. The marketplace is where healing meets horror and where superstition sells better than truth. Let's not overlook entertainment, if you can call it that. A wandering performer has set up near the well. He juggles rocks, poorly. He tells jokes, worse. His best act? A puppet show where a fox outsmarts a fat priest and runs off with a loaf of bread. The crowd laughs nervously, not because it's funny, but because it's dangerously close to blasphemy. He passes around a sack, and villagers toss in dried beans, bits of string, and occasionally a coin. Art pays poorly, but at least it's not taxed yet. There's something oddly resilient about this place. The market, despite its filth, noise, and countless indignities, is the heartbeat of the village. It's where alliances are built and broken, where futures are bought for the price of a goat's liver, where people pretend they're doing fine, while secretly counting how many meals they can skip before someone notices. The conversations, though casual on the surface, are layered with coded meanings. When Elena greets a neighbour with, "Your baby looks strong," she's not being kind, She's wondering how that family can afford meat. When someone says, "The Lord blesses your hands," they might be admiring your crops or implying you stole good soil. Language here is a weapon as much as a tool. The wrong word at the wrong time can stain your name for decades. There's no real police force, of course, just a rotating group of men with clubs and a tendency to overreact. Justice is handled quickly and publicly. No trials, just accusations, a crowd, and a punishment loud enough to satisfy the collective thirst for drama. The market isn't just where you buy goods, it's where you get humiliated, corrected, and sometimes exiled. And what about education? That's a luxury for monks and the wealthy. Most villagers can't read. Signs are marked with pictures, a loaf for the bakery, a fish for the monger. Even Giacomo, who's seen a few books in his time, fakes more knowledge than he truly has. He once convinced a merchant that a symbol on a broken vase was a blessing rune. It was a stain. But learning happens in other ways. Children learn to count by selling eggs. Women pass recipes in hushed whispers. Men teach each other how to haggle, bluff, and spot a scam. Knowledge here is survival, not enlightenment. By the time the sun begins its descent, the square is littered with crushed vegetables, torn fabric, and the day's discarded hopes. A goat chews on a shoe. A cat drags a fishtail into a corner. The smell has shifted from lively to rancid. Most stalls are empty, their owners trudging home with aching backs and lighter baskets. Elena finally gives her last loaf to the candlemaker's daughter, who smiles wide but says nothing. It's not charity, it's reputation. Elena knows that generosity, when seen, is as valuable as coin. Giacomo tips his hat to her, mocking or sincere, who can tell? As they walk home, the village slowly begins to hush. The energy spent in trade is replaced by silence, broken only by coughing, clanging shutters, and the occasional scream from someone who drank too much spoiled wine. The market is over, but the consequences of it will ripple into tomorrow. Did someone get a good deal today? Maybe. Did someone get cheated? Definitely. Did anyone come out ahead? Only the rats. But that's life here. You don't trade to thrive. You trade to not fall behind. You buy to not go hungry. You sell to be seen. And if you're lucky, just lucky enough, you might make it through another market day without becoming the village's next cautionary tale. Chapter 3. The Weaver's Curse. Craft, class, and cramped rooms. If you've ever fantasized about becoming a skilled craftsman in a medieval village, spinning cloth, carving wood, hammering iron, allow me to offer a small, historically accurate correction. It's not romantic, it's not liberating, and it definitely doesn't smell like cedar and fresh linen. It smells like sweat, mildew, burning oil, and disappointment. Today we step inside the home and workshop of the medieval weaver, a person trapped between praise and poverty, skill and suffocation, thread and threadbare hope. Elena's cousin, Ronaldo, is a weaver. Or rather, he's what the guilds would call a recognised artisan, which really means barely tolerated independent labourer with too much pride to beg and too little money to escape. His home is also his workplace, his storeroom, and his prison. One cramped room with a loom the size of a small horse, three-legged stools, drying cloth strips hanging from ceiling beams, and a window so narrow it might have been designed by a miser. Ronaldo wakes before sunrise, not because he's ambitious, but because his back hurts too much to sleep. Years of leaning into a wooden loom while pulling rough wool into shape have left his spine curved like a question mark. He eats a crust of hard bread, gulps down a ladle of thin broth, and gets to work. The weaving never ends. Orders are never paid on time. And fabric is always too rough, too thin, or too dull, especially when the buyer is looking for excuses to haggle. The loom dominates everything. Its constant creak fills the house, like an old man moaning with every pull. The foot pedal squeaks, the shuttle clacks, the threads snap. Repeat. 8 hours of that and your mind goes numb, your fingers blister, and your sense of joy dissolves somewhere between warp and weft. But in this village, being numb is almost aspirational. Now here's something few people know. Textile work was backbreaking, and not just because of the loom. Before you even reach that point, wool must be cleaned, carded, spun, dyed and dried. Each step a labour-intensive process involving sharp tools, boiling pots, and the occasional rat falling into the dye vat. That brilliant red scarf the mayor wears? It was probably coloured with crushed beetles. The deep blue sash worn by the local scribe, likely soaked in fermented urine to fix the dye. You're welcome for the image. But let's talk about the guilds. Those noble institutions supposedly designed to protect workers. In practice, guilds were medieval gatekeepers. Want to call yourself a weaver? You'd better know someone, pay dues, kiss a few rings, and wait until the Council of Crusty Old Craftsmen says you're worthy. And if you dared produce work without a license, fines. Public shaming. Possibly jail, or worse, forced to listen to the guildmaster recite fabric weights for 2 hours straight. Ronaldo, like many, is in the margins. He's skilled, but not powerful. He's respected, but not listened to. He's just useful enough to survive, and just poor enough to stay humble. That's the perfect status for most villagers. Good enough to exploit, not good enough to envy. His wife Lucetta helps with spinning. She spends hours hunched over a spindle, twisting wool into thread, her hands raw and red. She hums quietly as she works, not out of happiness, but out of habit. Her only break is when she takes their young daughter outside to stretch her legs. But even then, she's scanning for buyers, gossip, or the neighbour who still hasn't returned the borrowed kettle. And what of that child? She's already being taught to sort wool and scrape lye soap over fabric. Childhood is just pre-labour here. If you're old enough to hold something, you're old enough to work. Toys? Unnecessary. Education? Unavailable. Comfort? Unlikely. Now, let's not forget the upper-class customers. They show up at Ronaldo's door with high expectations and low budgets. They frown at perfectly serviceable linen and complain about imaginary flaws. This pattern is uninspired, one says, fingering a design that took 2 days to weave. Another sniffs. The colour is nice, but it lacks depth. Ronaldo grits his teeth. He knows better than to argue. One wrong word and they'll go to a rival, or worse, tell the priest he was rude. And that's another thing. Customer service, medieval edition, is a mix of deference and quiet rage. You smile, you bow, you nod, and then you scream into a sack of wool when they leave. Because in this world, your reputation can be ruined by a rumour. One claim of inferior thread, and you might as well burn your loom. And what do these craftspeople get in return? Not much. A few coins, sometimes produce. Occasionally a promise. Ronaldo once received half a chicken for a full bolt of linen. The other half, he was told, had run off. He didn't argue. Protein was protein. Now here's the kicker. If Ronaldo's work is too good, it can also be a problem. The guild might accuse him of undercutting prices. A noble might accuse him of pretending to be above his class. You see, the village loves talent, but distrusts success. Rise too fast, and someone will drag you back down, usually with scripture, gossip, or a well-placed tax audit. And the living conditions? Let's just say no one's airing out fabric for fun. The walls are damp. The chimney smokes, even when there's no fire. Mould grows on the ceiling in artistic swirls. The loom takes up the best corner, the family shares one bed, and privacy is a concept best left to castles. Even going to the latrine means walking outside into the mud and hoping the neighbour's goat isn't watching. Still, somehow, there's pride. Ronaldo doesn't speak of it, but it's there, in the way he trims threads with care, or tightens the frame each morning before starting again. It's not joy, it's not even dignity, it's just momentum. He weaves because he must, because in this village work is identity, And quitting isn't just failure, it's erasure. By sunset, Ronaldo's hands are cramped, Lucetta's back is bent, and their daughter is asleep next to a pile of half-spun wool. They eat in silence, sitting on creaking stools, the loom still looming in the corner like a silent judge. Outside, the village quiets, but inside this cramped, overworked home, the threads still whisper of ambition, of exhaustion, of a life measured not in riches, but in stitches. Ronaldo doesn't dream anymore. Not of travel, not of wealth, not even of rest. Dreams are a kind of rebellion, and rebellion is best avoided when you live under leaky rafters with 3 unpaid debts and a loom that moans louder than your own knees. But, in the brief moment between finishing dinner and collapsing onto the shared straw mattress, he does allow himself one indulgence: silence. Not true silence, of course. There's always the neighbour's dog barking at shadows, the drunkard stumbling home from the tavern, and the occasional creak from the roof, as if the house itself is complaining about the life it shelters. But compared to the day's noise, the clatter of spindles, the hiss of customers, the guild gossip, it's blessedly close. Lucetta, after clearing the meagre meal, rubs her wrists and stares at the fireless hearth. There's no money left for more wood. The last bundle burned too fast. They'll sleep cold again. But she doesn't mention it. Neither does Ronaldo. Complaints are luxuries. You keep them locked in your chest, buried under the more urgent weight of survival. The irony is, craftspeople like Ronaldo are often painted as the lifeblood of the village. They clothe its people, furnish its homes, build its carts, yet they're rarely invited to the tables of power or comfort. The baron may wear the wool, but he'll never shake the hand that spun it. And why would he? Dirt under the fingernails isn't fashionable. Let's talk class, because in this village, it hangs over everything like chimney soot. You are what you own, or more importantly, what you don't. The artisans sit just above the peasants, but far below the merchants, and eons below the nobility. They are trapped in a class that promises dignity but rarely delivers it. They work themselves to the bone, only to be reminded they don't belong in the finer pews at church. Social mobility? That myth is for songs and sermons. No one climbs here. They wait, they endure. They hope that their children might marry well, that a lord's servant might notice their handiwork, or that, just once, a guildmaster might look past lineage and see talent. It happens, just not to anyone you know. Even among craftspeople, there's a quiet hierarchy. The blacksmith commands respect. His trade involves fire, iron, danger, clearly masculine, clearly essential. The potter too, shaping from earth itself. But the weaver? The spinner? Too delicate, too quiet? Their work is invisible until it frays, and then it's blamed. Ronaldo knows this. He keeps his voice low in public, avoids boasting, never mentions that his cloth sells better than the cooper's barrels. But occasionally, in the privacy of his workshop, he lets himself remember the feel of fine thread, the way a tight weave resists pressure, the satisfaction of a perfect pattern appearing row by row. It's not pride, it's knowledge, a kind that lives in your muscles more than your mind. Now let's explore housing a bit deeper, because you can't separate craft from space. The home is the loom. The loom is the home. There's no work-life balance, only work. The kitchen table doubles as a cutting board. The corner near the chamber pot holds dye jars. The shelves sag with rolled fabrics, tangled yarn, and tools so worn they seem fossilized. Rats are regular guests, mice too. Lucetta swears one of them stole a thimble last week. She's not even mad. At least someone wanted it, she muttered. Ventilation is a fantasy. The one window is barely wider than a prayer book, and opening it invites more smoke than breeze. In summer, the room becomes an oven. In winter, an icebox. In every season, a trap. Children grow up crawling through thread piles, knocking over spindles, learning to count using knots and dye jars. Education happens between chores. No books, no tutors, just repetition. This is how we sort. This is how we pull. This is how we endure. And still, despite it all, outsiders see the final product. A beautiful scarf, a tightly stitched tunic, and assume the weaver lives in warmth and wealth. They forget that behind every inch of fabric lies 10 hours of labour, a dozen tiny cuts, and the quiet sigh of someone who knows they'll never afford to wear what they make. Let's pivot to criticism, because the village has no shortage of it. If Ronaldo's pattern is too plain, they call him lazy. If it's too bold, they call him proud. If his cloth tears, they blame his skill. If it holds, they say it's too stiff. He weaves under the weight of 100 eyes, none of which could do his job, but all of which feel qualified to judge it. And when guild inspectors come, and they do, unannounced, they arrive with noses turned up and fingers eager to poke. They measure threads, they sniff dyes, they frown at harmless wrinkles. One found a cat hair once and declared the whole batch contaminated. It cost Ronaldo 3 months of lost trade and a stern lecture on purity of product. As if medieval air wasn't already half cat hair and chimney ash. Sometimes, in quieter moments, Ronaldo wonders if he should have learned another trade. Carpentry maybe, something less fussy, less judged. But then he remembers how cloth bends, how patterns emerge, how fabric warms even the coldest shoulders. And he returns to the loom, because the truth is, crafting something from nothing is the closest thing to magic he knows. Lucetta feels it too. She once said, "Thread is like time. You only notice it when it's broken." She said it while mending a sleeve for the 3rd time, fingers moving faster than thought. In that moment, it didn't matter that the room was freezing or that dinner was thin soup again. It only mattered that something torn was becoming whole again. By nightfall, the house is quiet once more. The loom rests. The tools are tucked away. Ronaldo leans back against the wall, his muscles screaming, his mind blank. Tomorrow, the shuttle will fly again, the threads will snap again, the dye will stain again. And yet, when morning comes, he'll rise. Not because he wants to, but because he must. Because in this village, stopping means starving. And because the loom, like life itself, never asks if you're ready. It just waits to be fed. Chapter 4. Smoke and Silence. Inside a peasant kitchen. Step inside a medieval Italian peasant kitchen. Not the kind with herbs hanging photogenically from wooden beams or soft lighting dancing off copper pots. No, this kitchen is dark, cramped and pungent, where the walls are stained with soot and hope goes stale quicker than bread. The hearth, if you can call it that, is a fire pit ringed with cracked stone, burning smoky wood that never quite catches. The smoke rises reluctantly, pauses halfway to the ceiling, and then decides to stick around. There's a chimney somewhere, but it works more as a rumour than a vent. This is the domain of Lucetta, Ronaldo's wife, though domain suggests a level of control that's laughable. She rules this space like a sailor commands a leaky boat. She knows it's flawed, but she'll keep it afloat because no one else will. She moves through it with practiced instinct, ducking under low beams, stepping over a bent cat, shooing flies away from a pot of barley gruel that's pretending to be dinner. The kitchen, in this village, is more than just a room. It's a battlefield, not of shouting matches or thrown plates, though those happen, but of quiet, daily war against limited ingredients, faulty tools, and ungrateful mouths. Lucetta rises before the sun not because she's inspired, but because soaking lentils takes time, and if you forget, you're serving regret in a bowl by nightfall. Let's talk fuel. Firewood is currency. Good dry logs are hoarded like gold. Most of what Lucetta uses is damp collected from forest edges or snapped from fence posts when no one's looking. It smokes more than it burns, hissing angrily like it resents being set alight. She blows into it gently, trying not to cough too hard and alert the baby sleeping in the corner. Eventually, the fire gives in, but only partially. Like everything else in this village, it offers just enough to survive, but never enough to relax. Pots are heavy iron, handed down through generations and warped in strange ways. One has a hole that's been patched with clay and prayer. Utensils? A wooden spoon, blackened at the tip. A dull knife that doubles as a carrot peeler and a weapon in marital disputes. Plates are shared. Cups are communal. Cleanliness is theoretical. Boiling water before drinking. Only if you want to waste fuel or seem suspiciously educated. As for the menu, don't expect variety. Today's meal is barley gruel with a dash of yesterday's onion skin. Lucetta adds chopped beet greens, not because they taste good, but because they grow without asking. Protein is an occasional miracle. A cracked egg, a slice of dried sausage traded for a favour, or the noblest of medieval meats, whatever died recently. She stirs slowly, adding salt like a miser, glancing at the door every time someone walks past. If a neighbour smells the pot and suspects richness, the gossip will arrive before the aroma finishes drifting. Critically, food here isn't just sustenance, it's judgment. Feed your family too well and people whisper you've been hiding coin. Feed them too poorly and they assume you're cursed. Either way, someone's always watching. Lucetta once gave a child half an apple and was later accused of showing favouritism. No one asked where she got the apple. That wasn't the point. The point was that kindness was suspect. And yet, somehow, there's routine. The morning prep. The midday scrounge. The evening meal, served with the same solemnity as a church rite. Everyone eats in silence. Not because of reverence, but because talking wastes energy, and there's nothing nice to say about the meal anyway. It's hot, and it won't kill you. That's the standard. Let's take a moment to discuss gender roles, because this kitchen isn't just a space, it's a sentence. Lucetta doesn't cook because she loves it. She cooks because she's expected to. Because a woman's value here is measured in boiled grains and obedience. If the porridge is too thin, it's her fault. If it's too thick, still her fault. If someone gets sick, if the fire goes out, if the bread rises wrong, the blame lands with the spoon in her hand. And of course, men help. By which we mean they occasionally lift something heavy, comment on flavour without being asked, and sometimes remember to say thank you years later. Ronaldo is no brute, but even he forgets that Lucetta's kitchen is a daily crucible. He returns from the loom with aching hands, sits at the table, and waits. The meal appears like a seasonal miracle. He chews, nods once, and then stares at the fire like it owes him something. This imbalance is never discussed. It's tradition, they say. As if the weight of expectations was written by God himself. As if the soot-stained beams of this kitchen hold up heaven, not a collapsing roof. But the kitchen is also where secrets are kept. Where women whisper things they wouldn't dare say outside. Where bruises are examined in candlelight. Where stolen herbs are hidden in jars labelled basil. Where, late at night, Lucetta sometimes scribbles letters she never sends, dipping a chicken feather in beet juice, dreaming of cities she's never seen. There is no ventilation. The ceiling drips. A mouse scurries past. The floor is packed dirt, occasionally swept with a broom made from bundled twigs tied together with string and spite. And yet, the space functions. Meals are made. Bellies are filled. Guests, rare though they are, sit on upturned barrels and declare, "It smells good in here," which is a polite way of saying it smells like garlic and body heat. Let's not forget the in-laws either. Lucetta's mother-in-law used to live in this kitchen like a ghost who criticised everything. She's gone now, moved across the village, but her legacy remains in the form of 5 contradictory recipes carved into the pantry door and a spoon Lucetta keeps out of spite. When food is gone, dishes are washed with ash and water. Clean enough. The spoon is wiped on an apron. The pot is left to cool in the corner. If there are leftovers, they're guarded like treasure. If there's nothing left, they all pretend they're full. And in the rare moment when the fire dims and the family breathes as one, Lucetta sometimes smiles, not because she's happy, but because, in this room with its smoke and silence, she is needed. And in a village that forgets you the second you rest, that counts for something. Chapter 4. Smoke and Silence. Inside a peasant kitchen, night settles like soot over the village rooftops. Inside the kitchen, the embers glow low, more memory than fire now. The pot has been scraped clean. The bowls, such as they are, sit stacked on the hearth ledge, drying in the warm breath of coals. And yet, even after the meal, the kitchen does not sleep. It lingers. It watches. It remembers every burnt stew and spilled broth, every argument whispered between bites, every moment when survival masqueraded as dinner. Lucetta crouches by the fire pit, rubbing her hands for warmth. She isn't done. There's always something to prepare for tomorrow. Soaking beans, setting dough, refilling the water jug. In a home like this, you live from one meal to the next, tethered to chores that repeat like prayers. Miss a step, and the household stumbles. Let's talk about taboos, because medieval kitchens weren't just about food, they were moral battlegrounds. Meat on a Friday? Sinful. Butter during Lent? Risky. Feeding the dog before your husband? Scandalous. Women were judged not just on what they cooked, but when, how, and for whom. The kitchen wasn't merely functional, it was spiritual theatre, complete with an invisible audience of saints, neighbours, and gossiping cousins. Lucetta knows this. She cooks within the lines, because stepping outside them leads to whispers. And whispers, in a village this small, echo like thunder. Once she added garlic to a stew on a feast day. It clashed with church fasting rules. The priest didn't say anything, but 3 women came by the next morning offering unsolicited recipes and gentle reminders. One even brought holy water. Food also marks status, and that divide cuts deep. The village elite, for example, dine in a different universe. Their kitchens. Larger, cleaner, staffed produce meat pies, cheeses wrapped in herbs, eggs boiled soft, wine watered just enough to seem modest. They eat from glazed pottery, white mouths with actual cloth, and sometimes even have a second course. And when they walk past Lucetta's home and catch a whiff of simmering lentils, they wrinkle their noses and say, earthy. Criticism aside, there's also cruel humour in how the poor are told to be grateful. Grateful for hunger because it teaches humility. Grateful for hard bread because it builds strong teeth. Grateful for firewood scraps because some people have none. The kitchen becomes the site where this philosophy is swallowed, reheated, and fed back to the family until they start to believe that deprivation is virtue. Let's not forget the role of guilt. Mothers serve themselves last. Daughters eat smallest. And if anything is left over, it's usually offered to the men first, not because they demand it, but because centuries of expectation do. Lucetta learned this pattern not from a book, but from her mother, who learned it from hers, and so on. An invisible inheritance of silence and spoon scraping. But even in this system, there are quiet rebellions. Lucetta sometimes sneaks a second spoonful to her daughter when no one's watching. She hides spices in the rafters, saved from years of barter, and adds them only on days that feel too heavy to bear without flavour. Once, she roasted turnip skins just to see if anyone would notice. They didn't. She smiled anyway. And what about leftovers? In modern terms, they barely exist. There's no cold storage, no foil, no neatly labelled containers. Leftover stew is kept in the pot, pushed to the edge of the hearth. Bread is wrapped in cloth and hung from a hook to keep mice out. If it goes stale, it's soaked in wine or broth or milk, if you have it. Waste is a sin, not religiously, economically. The animals too are part of the kitchen ecosystem. Chickens peck just outside the back door, scratching at ash piles. A goat, if you're lucky enough to own one, lives practically in the same room and may offer milk, though getting it requires a patience most saints don't have. Cats are not pets. They are pest control with attitude problems. Dogs, if they exist, are often guard animals, fed last and thanked never. Occasionally a feast day transforms the kitchen, a borrowed chicken, a shared pie. A miracle of collaboration where 5 women somehow create a meal for 20 using 1 wheel of cheese and a handful of hope. These moments are rare, but they leave a glow behind. Lucetta remembers one winter when neighbours pulled apples to make cider. For one night the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and laughter. The memory is almost warm, but mostly it's just routine. Chop, stir, feed, repeat. There's no applause, no celebration. Only the satisfaction of not going to bed hungry and the anticipation of doing it all again tomorrow. The tools themselves tell stories. The iron ladle with a bent handle used to fish out bones from soup. The stone mortar that crushed herbs and fingers alike. A wooden board that served as both chopping block and table centerpiece. None of it matches, none of it shines, but every nick and stain is a chapter in the family's survival. By the hearth, Ronaldo sits, now more aware of the warmth and the effort behind it. He says little. Most men do after a long day, but Lucetta doesn't mind the silence. It's the only peace she gets. Their daughter sleeps in a basket near the wall, curled up beside a rolled cloth that serves as both blanket and pillow. The kitchen hums with the soft noises of night-time, a creaking beam, the wind nudging the shutters, the fire's final sigh. And here's the brutal truth. This kitchen is cleaner, warmer and safer than many others in the village. There are homes with no fire, no food, no hope. Homes where illness sits at the table like an uninvited guest. Where children cry themselves quiet. Where women cook with one eye on the door, afraid of who might come through it. So yes, Lucetta's kitchen is a trial. But it is also a refuge. A place held together by sheer will, spoon by spoon, breath by breath. It is her empire of embers, her battlefield, her quiet rebellion. And in the flickering dark she wipes the ladle one last time, hangs it on the crooked nail above the hearth, and turns in for the night. Tomorrow, the fire will be coaxed back to life, the pot will boil again, and history will repeat itself. Seasoned, as always, with smoke and silence. Chapter 5. Behind Monastery Walls. Power in Prayer. From the outside, the village monastery looks serene. Whitewashed walls catching the sun, ivy curling up toward bell towers, and wooden doors that creak open with what feels like divine purpose. Birds chirp from the cloister, candles flicker behind stained glass, and if you didn't know better, you'd swear holiness itself wafted through the air. But step inside, and you'll find something far more complicated. An institution that preaches humility, but functions with precision, hierarchy, and the quiet power of bureaucracy dressed in robes. The monastery looms just beyond the main square, close enough to remind the villagers of sin, but far enough to maintain a polite distance from livestock smells. It is both sanctuary and watchdog, a place of prayer, but also records, rules and judgment. The villagers bow their heads as they pass, not just out of reverence, but caution. A careless word here can echo down the pews for weeks. Meet Brother Matteo, a thin man with a permanent squint and fingers stained from ink more than dirt. He wakes at dawn, not to work the fields or stoke a fire, but to chant. Morning prayers begin before the rooster even bothers. Latin syllables echo through stone halls as monks shuffle like shadows, half awake, half holy. This is called the Divine Office. It happens 7 times a day, every day. Because apparently God has a rigid schedule. Now don't misunderstand, monks do work. They till gardens, bake bread, copy manuscripts, tend to bees. But it's controlled labour, structured, civilized, and most importantly, backed by land and donations. You see, monasteries aren't poor, not really. They own fields, mills, vineyards. Peasants work those lands and pay rent for the privilege, and all the while, the monastery claims to live in poverty. It's the most comfortable hardship money can buy. Inside, the air always smells of wax, ink, and something faintly medicinal. The corridors are narrow, the walls lined with verses, and the silence, oh, the silence is sacred. At least in theory. In practice, the monks whisper. A lot. About scripture, yes, but also village drama, political rumours, and whether the new novice snores too loudly during compline. Let's pause for a moment on power, because behind the prayers, monasteries are powerful entities. They document births and deaths. They own land titles. They influence marriages. They decide what is heresy and what is dinner. The village priest may hold the ear of the crowd, but the abbot holds the purse of the region. And yet they never say it outright. That would be prideful. Instead, they smile beatifically and ask for offerings. Brother Matteo oversees the scriptorium, a dim room where monks spend hours hunched over parchment, copying not just sacred texts, but legal contracts, ledgers, and occasionally dirty jokes written in the margins when no one's looking. He's good with a quill and dangerous with a ledger. Need to verify land boundaries? He has a map. Wondering if your marriage was ever properly blessed? He's got a record. He once settled a village dispute by producing a receipt from 40 years ago. Divine memory, they called it. In reality, just excellent filing. But even monks aren't immune to pettiness. Matteo has a long-running feud with Brother Pietro, the beekeeper. Something about stolen honey. No one speaks of it aloud, but jars occasionally go missing, and bees seem oddly aggressive around Matteo's cell. Forgiveness is holy. Revenge is practical. Meals are quiet, eaten in rows, with one monk reading scripture aloud while the rest chew in solemn misery. The food is simple: beans, bread, occasional fish, but better than what most villages scrape together. Wine is permitted, in moderation of course, which means Matteo has moderated himself into a rosy glow more than once. The dormitory is a long, cold room filled with hard beds and harder dreams. Privacy? None. Comfort? Irrelevant. Cleanliness? Expected, though bathing is rare. Monks clean themselves with vinegar and linen cloths. There's a ritual to it, a method, and of course, a prayer for every body part. Let's talk about hypocrisy, because while monasteries preach sacrifice, they often live in subtle luxury. Their wine is aged, their bread is fresh, their linens are imported. The abbot has a walking stick carved from ivory, a gift, he says, from a grateful donor. The altar cloths are embroidered with gold thread. And yet, when the village asks for help, the monastery offers spiritual guidance, far more readily than coin. They are generous, yes, but always in ways that reflect back upon themselves. A free loaf? Blessed. A patch of land? On loan for prayer. A cured illness? Credited to relics stored beneath the chapel bones no one can quite identify, but everyone respects. Matteo once cured a nobleman's insomnia with lavender oil and scripture. The noble, in turn, donated a silver chalice. It's never used. Too valuable. But it shines from its place in the cabinet. A quiet reminder that faith, when practiced strategically, pays dividends. And then there are the lay brothers. Men not fully sworn as monks, but doing the bulk of manual labour. They till the soil, muck the stalls, scrub the floors. They live under the same rules, but with fewer privileges. They are the monastery's hands, while the choir monks are its voice. Matteo rarely speaks to them, not out of cruelty, just indifference. Spiritual equality is preached, but practical hierarchy is enforced. Outside the walls, the villagers imagine the monks in constant communion with heaven. Inside, they're often just trying not to fall asleep during terce. They argue over psalm translations. They sneak extra rations. They complain about sore backs, cold floors, and the abbot's fondness for cabbage. And yet, despite the contradictions, they are respected. Because the monastery offers something no one else does: certainty. A rhythm, a reason, a sense that someone, somewhere, is keeping watch, even if that watch is through half-lidded eyes and wine-flushed cheeks. As evening bells toll, Matteo places his quill down, stretches his fingers, and mutters a short prayer, not for peace or wisdom, but that Brother Pietro's bees don't find their way into his sandals again. Holiness, after all, is easier to achieve when your ankles aren't swollen. Evening settles over the monastery with the same certainty it has for 100 years. The bells toll softly, echoing out across the fields and rooftops, calling monks to vespers, the last major prayer before nightfall. Candles flicker to life in corridors where sunlight has retreated, and the brothers file silently into the chapel, heads bowed, robes brushing the floor, each carrying the weariness of repetition like a second garment. Brother Matteo slides into his place near the back, rubbing his temples as the chanting begins. The psalms rise, low and slow, more habit than hymn. Some monks murmur from memory, others squint at worn parchment lit by trembling candlelight. A few mouths move without sound, caught in that sacred grey area between devotion and drowsiness. Let's talk honestly about faith. Not the lofty, golden kind they write in cathedral walls, but the daily kind, whispered in cold rooms and repeated in rhythm until belief becomes background noise. For many monks, belief is not a blazing fire. It's a routine, a discipline, a quiet surrender. They chant not because they feel divine ecstasy, but because it's the hour to chant. It's Tuesday. It's raining. It's what one does. Matteo sometimes wonders if God is listening, and if he is, does he mind the imperfections? The lazy verses, the flat notes, the way Brother Pietro occasionally slips in humming just to stay awake? Maybe not. Maybe that's the whole point. That worship, like weaving or cooking or farming, is about showing up, even when tired, especially when tired. But behind the ritual lies a darker truth: control. Monasteries wield spiritual authority like a blade hidden in a prayer book. Their power is quiet, pervasive, and utterly unchallengeable. A single sermon on morality can shift village behaviour for weeks. A frown from the abbot carries more weight than any fine. And when disputes arise over land, livestock, or honour, it's often the monks who mediate. They frame it as service. The villagers recognise it as ownership. There's a ledger in Matteo's scriptorium with more influence than any sword. It holds a record of debts owed to the monastery: land rents, tithes, donations made under duress and recorded in fine, unalterable ink. Many of the entries were made before Matteo joined. Some names are long dead, but their heirs still pay. Because the Church forgets nothing. Forgiveness may be divine, but collections are perpetual. Now and then, villagers seek confession. They kneel in corners of the chapel, whispering fears, sins, and gossip disguised as guilt. Matteo listens with a face of practiced sympathy, then writes vague notes in a book only he and the abbot read. Sins, after all, are useful, not for punishment, but leverage. A merchant who cheats on weights. A widow who skips mass. A young man caught with herbs not found in the market. They all confess, and the monastery remembers. Even death passes through monastery hands. The brothers conduct burials, say prayers, and ring the bells. 3 slow tones for a man, 2 for a woman, 1 for a child. But funerals aren't free. The soul may be eternal, but the grave costs silver. Matteo once buried a stranger in a borrowed robe, and used the moment to remind villagers of the dangers of dying unblessed. Donations tripled the next week, and the relics, yes, the sacred relics, locked in an iron box beneath the altar. A scrap of cloth from St. Apollonia, a shard of bone allegedly from a martyr, a vial of something called miraculous water that smells suspiciously like last year's wine. Pilgrims leave offerings at the box. Coins, ribbons, whispered pleas. It's unclear whether the saints respond, but the monastery certainly does, counting each coin with holy precision. Let's pause for a moment on education, because while the village stumbles through superstition, the monks copy texts, debate theology, and study medicine. Matteo knows how to read Galen, scribble Latin, and identify the best herbs for boils. This knowledge is sacred because it's scarce. The monks never hoard it outright, but they also don't distribute it freely. A curious peasant is offered a proverb. A noble might be given a page. The rest is kept behind locked doors in the monastery's modest library. Even architecture tells a story. The chapel is tall and stone cold, designed to impress. The refectory is narrow and controlled, like their meals. The garden is geometric, each herb planted by purpose, not whim. And the gate, always closed at dusk, sends a clear message: holiness has hours. That said, monasteries aren't immune to vice. There are quiet transgressions. A stolen candle here, a hidden flask of wine there. Matteo once caught Brother Filippo napping during midday prayers with crumbs in his beard. No punishment, just a knowing nod. Sometimes the flesh wins, and the cloth forgives. And yes, there are rumours that the abbot once accepted a donation to alter a land record, that a certain monk disappears too often into the woods with herbs not meant for tea, that the singing at midnight is more for theatrics than theology. The villagers whisper. The monks do not respond. Their silence, like their prayers, is practiced and effective. Still, the monastery provides. During plagues, it opens its infirmary. During famine, it gives out bread, often stale, but given nonetheless. During floods, it shelters the wet and weeping. And so the villagers endure the judgment, the sermons, the uneven generosity. Because when disaster strikes, the monastery does act. Eventually. Publicly. And usually with a banner bearing its name. Back in the chapel, Vespers ends. The brothers file out, robes rustling like dry leaves. Matteo lingers, staring at the altar. He whispers a short prayer, not for the village, or the monastery, or even his soul. Just for quiet, just for sleep without dreams. He blows out the candle, the smoke curling upward, like a ghost too tired to haunt. Chapter 6. Midwives and Maledictions. Medicine and Superstition. If you ever found yourself sick in a medieval Italian village, fevered, vomiting, coughing up questionable substances, your options for treatment were limited, imaginative, and, more often than not, deeply contradictory. The line between healing and harming was razor thin, and the most effective cure was usually waiting and hoping, which made midwives, herbalists, and medicine men either miraculous lifesavers or dangerous threats to church authority. Let's begin with Agnès, the village's unofficial midwife, herbalist, and scapegoat in waiting. She's in her 50s, maybe 60s. No one knows for sure, least of all her. And she's got the kind of face that makes children behave and grown men pretend they aren't crying. Her hut sits at the edge of the village, neither fully welcomed nor outright avoided, surrounded by wild herbs, drying plants, and one suspiciously intelligent-looking black cat. Agnès knows things. How to cut a fever with elderflower, how to stop bleeding with cobwebs, how to bring on labour with mugwort tea. She can diagnose a chest illness by listening to your cough and tell if your child will survive the winter by checking their breath against a mirror. And for all this, she is simultaneously respected and feared. The paradox of the village healer is this: people come to you in desperation, but distance themselves the second they're well again. Too much success? Witch? Too many failures? Fraud. Even when Agnès cures someone, the gratitude lasts only until the next misfortune, at which point villagers start remembering that her roof never leaks and her garden blooms too early. Healing here isn't about science. It's about ritual, belief, and desperation. Most villagers trust garlic more than logic. They wear amulets against fevers, hang crosses above their beds, and avoid turning bread upside down on the table, lest it invite misfortune. Illness is rarely just physical. It's moral, spiritual, social. A punishment, a test, or, if you're especially unlucky, a curse. Take childbirth. It's the most common miracle in the village, and the most dangerous. Midwives like Agnès are essential, yet never fully protected. If the baby dies, the blame falls squarely on her. If the mother dies, the whispers begin. If both survive, well, the priest still grumbles that the child should have been baptized before its first breath. You can't win, only survive. And the tools of healing? Humble. A sharp knife boiled in wine, a strip of clean linen if you can find it, beeswax, herbs, hot stones, and lots of whispered prayers. Sometimes Agnesi uses a poultice made from mashed garlic, old wine and lard. Does it work? Maybe. Does it smell like something died in a bakery? Absolutely. When people get sick, really sick, they usually do two things. They pray and they go to Agnesi. Sometimes they go in that order. Sometimes they do both at once. The church is not thrilled by this. The priest prefers they come to him for holy water and confession, not herbs and root tea. He once gave a sermon in which he warned that those who seek healing outside of God's grace invite demons into their homes. Agnesi laughed so hard she nearly choked on her own cough syrup. Still, the threat is real. The line between healer and heretic is thinner than the village soup. All it takes is a string of unfortunate deaths or a single lie from a jealous rival, and suddenly you're standing in front of a tribunal, explaining why you had bones in a jar and a foxtail over your door. And not all sickness can be soothed by herbs. There's a cough that lingers until the ribs crack, a fever that burns so hot the eyes go cloudy, a wasting illness that leaves the body whole but the mind wandering. These conditions don't respond to garlic or prayer, and when they appear, the village shifts into survival mode. Doors shut, eyes avoid, and even friends forget your name. Let's not forget the barber surgeon, the other half of the village's medical misfortune. He cuts hair, drains blood, pulls teeth, and occasionally cures fevers by slicing open veins with a knife that has never once been cleaned. His tools sit on a wooden tray stained with iron and regret. He carries leeches in a jar. He calls every operation routine. He has lost 3 patients this year and considers it an improvement over last year's 5. Agnesi despises him. He once blamed her for a patient's death after he'd bled the man dry and prescribed a potion made from boiled horsetail. The priest sided with him, of course. He was a man. Agnesi was a woman who knew too much. The balance of power was rarely about results. But here's the cruel twist. Sometimes the barber's methods do work. A bloodletting relieves pressure. A cauterized wound avoids rot. Even a tooth pulled at the right moment can save a life. Medicine here is half guesswork, half luck, and entirely a matter of who lives long enough to tell their version of the story. And then there's superstition, thick as fog. People tie knots in string to protect infants. They sprinkle salt across thresholds. They leave offerings of bread and milk at the edge of the woods, just in case. If a baby cries too much, they blame the evil eye. If the cows stopped giving milk, someone muttered the wrong thing. Agnesi has been called upon to reverse curses, remove hexes, and identify hidden witches. Her method? Look serious, burn herbs, say Latin-sounding gibberish, and charge a chicken. What's astonishing is how well this works. Not because the spirits are real, but because fear is. And fear, soothed, often feels like healing. Agnesi is smart enough to stay quiet during inquisitions. When the bishop's men pass through asking questions in Latin and sniffing around for heresy, she becomes humble. She lets her fire die low. She puts away the carved bones and the jars of preserved frogs. She smiles, nods, and insists she only uses rosemary and faith. But the village knows the truth. They need her. When the church offers salvation, Agnesi offers soup. And in the daily grind of aches, births, and broken toes, soup wins more converts than Scripture ever will. Chapter 6. Midwives and Maledictions. Medicine and superstition. When illness strikes in a medieval Italian village, it doesn't arrive quietly. It makes an entrance, sudden, dramatic, and unmistakable. A child coughs blood into a linen sheet. A strong man collapses mid-sentence. A woman begins to shake uncontrollably in the night. And just like that, panic spreads faster than the fever. People don't ask, "What is it?" They ask, "Who brought it?" In a world without microscopes or germ theory, blame is medicine. Blame gives structure to chaos. You blame the cold wind, the spoiled meat, the woman who looked at your cow too long last week. Someone is always at fault because the idea that sickness might be random is more terrifying than the illness itself. Agnese knows this. She watches the signs, the shifting glances, the sudden silence when she enters a room. She's cured 5 people this month, but 1 child died, an infant born too soon to a mother who laboured too long, and now there are whispers. The baby didn't cry. The cord was black. Maybe it wasn't meant to live. These aren't conclusions. They're accusations with softer edges. The village has a long memory and a short tolerance for mystery. A few bad coincidences and your legacy can change overnight. The same herbs that yesterday cured a fever are today called devil's lettuce. The same woman they trusted with childbirth now smells too strongly of smoke and walks barefoot too often. And just like that, fear takes root. It doesn't help that the church fans the flames with sermons on spiritual purity. Illness, they say, is the rot of the soul made flesh. If your body is sick, your faith is weak. If your child dies, perhaps your confession was incomplete. The logic is circular and cruel, but it keeps people in pews and priests in power. And in a society where health is fragile and death is common, people crave meaning, even if it comes with shame. Sometimes the village demands a scapegoat, someone to burn, not literally, not always, but symbolically. That girl who never married, that man with a twisted leg, the widow who talks to herself. Agnese has seen it happen before. Once, a harmless old woman was locked in her home for poisoning the well with a glance. Her crime, she didn't cry at her husband's funeral, and so Agnese walks carefully. She speaks little. She accepts payment in eggs and silence. She never makes eye contact with the priest unless he speaks first. When someone is cured, she says, the saints were kind. When someone dies, she says, their soul was ready. Always deferential, always small. But inside her hut, healing still happens. Her shelves are lined with jars, crushed lavender, wormwood, dried rose petals, mint, willow bark, poppy sap. Some are labelled, others aren't. She knows them all by texture, smell, and memory. There's a recipe for every ailment, real or imagined. She keeps records in her head, who gets night sweats, who coughs in summer, whose wounds don't heal as fast as they should. She listens better than any monk. She remembers more than any doctor. One evening, a boy arrives at her door with a swollen leg, red and hot to the touch. His mother follows close behind, wringing her hands, offering a stale loaf in exchange for help. Agnese says nothing. She crushes comfrey root into a paste, mixes it with honey, and wraps the boy's leg with linen torn from her own sleeve. Keep it dry, she warns, and boil this bark for tea. 3 days. The mother nods. No questions, no thanks, just a trembling hope that won't last if things get worse, and they often do. Because sometimes, no matter how many roots you mash or prayers you whisper, the body gives out. Not from lack of effort, but from the simple truth that medicine here is a gamble. Some fevers break, some don't, some wounds heal, some rot, and the healer always pays the emotional bill. Let's talk about mental illness, though no one calls it that. When a man begins muttering to himself and tearing at his clothes, the villagers say he's touched. When a woman weeps for days without reason, they say she's cursed. Agnese tries to help, sometimes with herbs, sometimes with touch, sometimes with stories. But most turn to the priest, who offers holy water and lectures on temptation. The afflicted are sometimes cured, more often abandoned, and occasionally locked indoors for their safety. And yet, some of Agnese's cures work, startlingly so. A poultice that drains an infection, a bitter tea that halts a cough, a salve that soothes cracked skin. The village never says thank you. Gratitude implies trust, and trust is dangerous. But they return. Again and again. They leave chickens at her door. They carve small symbols into trees near her hut, wards of protection, or maybe just superstition. Either way, it means they still believe. Sort of. Meanwhile, the barber surgeon grows envious. His bloodlettings are being questioned. A merchant refused leeches last week and went to Agnese for boiled yarrow instead. This doesn't sit well. He mentions it to the priest. The priest gives a pointed sermon about women who pretend to speak for heaven. Agnese listens from behind the crowd. She smiles. She's heard worse. Because she knows something the church doesn't. Pain teaches loyalty. And in this village, everyone is in pain. Somewhere, somehow. When a child burns with fever, doctrine fades. When a man cannot walk, ideology crumbles. In those moments, faith is not found in scripture, but in a hand offering soup, salver, and silence. Still, the danger is real. Agnese keeps a bag packed, just in case. A pouch of herbs, a small blade, a scrap of dried meat. She's lived long enough to know that a healer's value can flip in a heartbeat. All it takes is one accusation, one child dying in the wrong home, and she becomes the sickness they need to purge. And so she moves like smoke. Essential, present, yet always ready to vanish. Chapter 7, When the Church Bells Toll, Guilt, Gossip, and God. In this village, you don't need a clock to know what time it is. You have the church bell. It rings for births. It rings for deaths. It rings when someone's late to confession and when someone else is late to their own funeral. And everyone hears it, always. Because the church, perched in the heart of the village like a watchful hawk, makes sure of it. The bell doesn't just measure time, it measures morality. You're expected to know the difference between the chime that calls for morning mass and the one that announces someone has died without last rites. A long, slow ring means someone important is being buried. A quick, sharp one, someone less important, but still taxable, has passed. Everything, even death, is neatly categorized by tone. Step inside the church on any given day, and you'll find rows of wooden pews worn smooth by centuries of shifting guilt. The air is thick with incense and unspoken confessions. A cracked fresco of the Last Judgment looms above the altar, Jesus staring down as if he's personally disappointed in your Tuesday decisions. This is the domain of Father Umberto, the village priest. Thin, stern, with a voice like wet gravel. He speaks more Latin than Italian, and doesn't believe in smiling unless it's paired with a sermon on eternal damnation. He's not unkind, just chronically unimpressed with everything. Especially villagers who fail to tithe properly. Let's talk about guilt, the true currency of the medieval church. Gold buys indulgences, but guilt buys compliance. It's more effective than taxes, longer lasting than fear, and entirely self-renewing. You can be forgiven for almost anything. Infidelity, theft, even murder. So long as you confess with the proper level of shame and hand over something of value. A coin. A chicken. A promise. Father Umberto has a ledger, not of sins, but of donations. He insists it's only used to track parish resources, but everyone knows it doubles as a spiritual scoreboard. The more generous you are, the more flexible God becomes. One merchant recently gave a sack of flour after yelling at his wife in public. The following Sunday, Father Umberto preached about the virtue of honest men who correct their households with firmness. Coincidence? No one thinks so. Confession is a weekly ritual. Villagers line up, clutching their sins like damp laundry. Some whisper, others cry. Most recite a version of the same 5 offences: sloth, envy, impure thoughts, eating too well on a Friday, thinking poorly of their neighbour, which is usually justified. Father Umberto nods, offers penance, and mentally files their name away. Not for revenge, he's not petty, but for leverage. A priest with a good memory never lacks influence. Gossip and God go hand in hand here. The church is not just a house of worship, it's a stage. What you wear, where you sit, how long you pray, it all says something. If you skip Mass, you'd better be bedridden. If you come in late, all heads turn. If you pray too loudly, you're showing off. Too quietly, clearly hiding something. Faith is not just belief, it's performance. Elena, our baker's daughter, knows this game well. She dresses modestly for Sunday, braids her hair tight, and kneels with just the right amount of sorrow. She watches the others from the corner of her eye, taking mental notes. That widow in the second row, left after the homily again. That merchant's son, whispered to a girl during the psalm. Tisk. In a small village, religion isn't personal, it's public theatre. What you confess can haunt you. What you don't confess might be worse. The priest can't tell anyone what you've said, but he can hint. And hinting is more powerful than shouting. Let's not forget the rules. No meat on Fridays. No weddings during Lent. No working on feast days, unless it's urgent, and urgent depends entirely on who's asking. There are saint days to observe, fasts to endure, relics to revere. And woe to the woman who gives birth during Easter week. The child is either blessed or doomed, depending on who tells the story. Punishments vary. A missed confession might earn you extra penance. A public sin, say, an affair or a fistfight during Vespers, might require a walk through the village barefoot, carrying a candle and wearing a sign that says sinner. It's not subtle, but it is effective. Shame keeps the wheels turning. Yet, despite the scrutiny, the church is also a refuge. It's the only building with stone walls, a solid roof, and sometimes miraculously quiet. People go there to cry, to think, to pray, or just to escape the noise of livestock and obligation. For many, it's the only place where they feel seen without being touched. And for all his sternness, Father Umberto does care in his own way. He blesses the sick, he buries the dead. He keeps records of every birth, baptism, and burial, stored in a chest locked with 2 iron keys. He once spent 3 days helping a starving family hide from tax collectors. He didn't mention it in a sermon. He didn't need to. The family never forgot. But even his compassion comes with rules. He won't marry a couple unless both confess first. He won't bless a house that keeps a black chicken, bad omen. And he absolutely won't forgive a man who insults the Virgin Mary, even in jest. That's one sin that sticks. The church is also the village's information centre. It's where news is announced, a noble's visit, a plague warning, a new tithe. It's where people learn who's been excommunicated, who's been married, and who was seen too close to the woods on a moonless night. Knowledge flows through the pews faster than water in a drought. And then there's the choir, a collection of boys with angelic faces and demonic pitch. They sing at funerals, weddings, and on major feast days, often flat, always loud. Matteo, our monk from earlier, sometimes comes to help correct them. He doesn't succeed, but he enjoys the suffering. Father Umberto once said, "God listens with mercy, not taste." The bells toll again. Evening. Time for the Angelus. Everyone pauses, crosses themselves, whispers a prayer, and then resumes whatever sin they were in the middle of. Because that's the truth no one admits. Faith is not about being perfect. It's about knowing the rhythm of guilt and grace, the balance between fear and comfort. The church doesn't demand purity, it demands participation. By the time Sunday rolls around, the village transforms. The same people who spent the week knee-deep in manure and market lies now wash their hands, dust off their tunics, and march into the church with the posture of saints. The bell rings longer on Sundays, stretching across the rooftops like a commandment. Everyone must attend. Even if you're sick, dying, or otherwise dead, you're expected to at least send word. Inside the church, it's standing room only. The front pews are filled with the well-fed and well-dressed, the landholders, the merchants, the scribe with his crooked spectacles. Behind them sit the artisans and craftsmen. The back rows are for the peasants and the suspiciously barefoot. And in the corner, under the cracked fresco of St. Sebastian, are the ones no one wants to sit beside, the beggars, the lepers, and that one family that always smells of boiled cabbage. There's a strict unspoken hierarchy, and everyone obeys it. Elena, our baker's daughter, knows her place. She walks in with her mother, eyes lowered, clutching her shawl as if it were armour. They find a seat near the side wall, close enough to hear the sermon, far enough not to be seen. The Mass begins. Latin prayers echo, incomprehensible to most, but beautifully spoken. It's not about understanding. It's about repetition, rhythm, and the comfort of being part of something bigger than yourself, even if that something is judging you silently. Father Umberto takes the pulpit. He speaks with calm authority, eyes sweeping over the crowd like a crow assessing a field. His sermon today is on envy, or pride, or lust. They all blend together after a while. But the subtext is clear. Someone has sinned recently, and he knows who. And if you don't, you should be worried it might be you. The power of a medieval sermon wasn't in its volume. It was in its implications. Father Umberto never names names. He doesn't have to. A few lingering glances. A dramatic pause. A sentence like "some among us have strayed" is enough to set off a week of speculation. By the time Mass ends, half the congregation has decided who some must be. And that's the real mechanism of social control religion, amplified by gossip. The church provides the vocabulary. The villagers supply the imagination. Together they build reputations and destroy them, one raised eyebrow at a time. Confession, meanwhile, is less about redemption and more about damage control. You go not just to cleanse your soul, but to get ahead of the rumours, to prove you're trying, to keep the priest from mentioning certain troubling behaviours in his next sermon. You confess what's expected, you lied, you skipped a fast, you envied someone's garden. Nothing too specific, nothing that could stick. But even vague sins come with penance, and penance is performance. You might be told to light a candle every day for a week, or to fast again. Or, if the sin was especially juicy, to kneel in the square holding a cross while the children throw pebbles and ask invasive questions. Of course, not everyone confesses honestly. Many lie. Some omit. One villager, an old butcher with shaky hands, confessed the same sin every week for 10 years. I stole a sausage. No one questioned it. Not because they believed him, but because he was predictable. And predictable sinners are the easiest to live with. The real fear is the unpredictable ones. The ones who don't confess at all. The ones who skip Mass, walk alone at night, keep strange symbols above their doors. These people become legends quickly. Their flaws grow in the retelling. A missing confession becomes devil worship. A skipped feast day becomes a pact. Eventually they're shunned, not because anyone knows anything, but because everyone assumes someone must. The sacraments, too, are wrapped in spectacle. Baptisms are public affairs, with squirming infants and forced smiles. The priest asks the same questions every time. Do you renounce Satan? The mother nods. The baby cries. Someone sneezes. The candle is lit, then blown out too soon. It's tradition, chaos, and holiness in equal measure. Weddings are grander. Flowers, bread, music, if someone can find a lute that isn't broken. But before the vows, there's always a whisper campaign. Did you hear what she did before they courted? He drinks. His cousin was excommunicated once. The priest ignores it. He has a schedule. He blesses the union, reminds them of marital duty, and quietly collects a chicken for his trouble. And then there's death. The one thing the church handles with unwavering clarity. A dying man is given last rites. A dead man is buried with Latin and solemnity. But a man who dies unblessed, that's complicated. Some say his soul lingers. Others say it's damned. Either way, his wife is advised to pray harder and his name is spoken less. The church keeps a record of these things: births, deaths, marriages, absences, confessions missed, coins given. It's all written down in a bound book, locked inside a wooden box beneath the altar. Matteo, the monk with the ink-stained fingers, helps maintain it. He once joked that between him and God, he's the one with the better memory. But for all its rules and rituals, the church also provides structure. It answers questions the village can't. Why did the crops fail? Sin. Why did the baby die? God's will. Why is life so hard? Mystery. It offers closure where none exists, and that, more than any sermon, is its true power. When the bell rings again, signalling the end of Mass, the villagers shuffle out into the light, blinking like moles. Conversations begin instantly, but always in hushed tones. Someone didn't kneel. Someone took communion with their left hand. Someone wore green during a saint's feast. Nothing is forgotten. Everything is recorded. If not by the church, then by the mouths of those who sit closest to it. And so the church remains, eternal, immovable, and entirely human. Built from stone and suspicion, it towers not just over the village, but inside it. In their fears, their hopes, their conversations, their confessions. It does not need to punish. It only needs to watch. Chapter 8. Walls and Warnings. The Fear of Foreigners. The village is surrounded by a wall, not a grand stone fortress or anything you'd see in a history painting. Just a low, crumbling barrier of field stone, reinforced in places with rotten wood and thorny brush. It's more symbolic than defensive, barely high enough to keep out a determined goat. But in the minds of the villagers, it's a line drawn in blood and memory. On this side, familiarity, safety, and shared superstition. On the other side, everything else. Medieval people feared many things: plague, famine, taxes, but nothing quite stirred the soul like the presence of an outsider. The unknown wasn't exotic, it was dangerous, suspicious, possibly cursed. Foreigners brought new ideas, new accents, new diseases, and worst of all, new gods. And no one wanted more gods. The one they had already scared them enough. Outsiders didn't need to come from far away. Someone from the next village over 10 miles on foot could be called a stranger, and if they spoke with a different rhythm, wore a different belt buckle, or chewed their bread too slowly, they were watched. Smiled at, perhaps, but only through tight lips and narrowed eyes. That fear had roots. Invasions were a generational trauma. Memories of bandits, mercenaries, or even travelling clerics who spoke too many languages and asked too many questions lingered like old smoke. When things went missing, it was never the boy next door. It was the traveller, even if he'd been gone for weeks. And when crops failed or animals miscarried, well, it must have been something he left behind. Enter Giovanni, a peddler who appears at the village gate once every few months. He arrives with a cart full of fabric, pots, dried fruit, combs, needles, and the most precious commodity of all, news. He wears a wide-brimmed hat, a too clean cloak, and a smile too sharp for local tastes. The children love him. The mothers are curious. The men, however, look at him like a wild dog that might bite or bless them, depending on the weather. Giovanni knows how to tread carefully. He pitches his stall near the edge of the market, never quite in the centre, never blocking a local space. He greets the priest with reverence. He compliments the bread, praises the local sheep, and never mentions politics unless someone else does first. It's a delicate performance. Pretend to belong without claiming to. And yet, no matter how polite he is, suspicion trails behind him like a second shadow. Elena, watching from her bakery stall, sees how people smile and frown in the same breath. They want his goods, yes, but they do not trust his story. Where does he sleep? Why doesn't he bring a wife? Did you see the mark on his hand? These aren't questions, they're warnings disguised as curiosity. The fear of outsiders isn't always loud. Sometimes it's whispered. Sometimes it's built into policy. The village has unwritten rules. No stranger sleeps inside the gates. No foreign coin is accepted without a blessing. No wandering minstrel performs unless the priest approves the lyrics. One summer, a pair of travelling musicians set up near the chapel. Their songs were catchy, a little too catchy. By morning, they were gone, and the church doors were washed with holy water. The church, of course, reinforces this fear. Sermons often mention the dangers of those who wander without purpose. Saint stories feature temptations brought by travellers. Even holy men who journey between towns are framed as exceptions, protected by piety, not welcomed by nature. The message is clear: salvation stays in one place. Sin rides a horse. But fear isn't only about strangers themselves. It's also about what they represent: change. Ideas from elsewhere challenge the village order. New customs provoke discomfort. Giovanni once gave a young boy a toy carved like a dragon. Beautiful, harmless. Within hours, it was in the fire. Too pagan, someone said. It had wings, someone else whispered. It looked back at me, said the priest. Isolation becomes a comfort. The same faces, the same rhythms, the same rituals. There's safety in sameness. Outsiders are unpredictable, and predictability is the only stability most peasants can rely on. The soil may fail, the seasons may betray, but your neighbour at least curses in the same accent. Still, the hypocrisy runs deep. The village needs outsiders. They rely on peddlers for needles, on travellers for gossip, on nobles for coin. When plague strikes, they want distant monks with strange relics. When famine comes, they pray a foreign caravan will arrive with grain. They fear what's different, but they need it to survive. Giovanni knows this too. That's why he always returns. Not too often, not too soon. Just enough to remain mysterious but necessary. He keeps his stories short, never brags, never lingers. He once saved a child from choking during market day and didn't mention it again. Let the villagers tell the story. Let it mutate into myth. A good outsider knows when to speak and when to vanish. Critically, the fear of foreigners is not based in logic. It's emotional insulation. A shield against the idea that life might be more complicated than the village rules suggest. That their suffering isn't noble. That their values aren't universal. That beyond these crumbling walls, other people live differently and sometimes better. And that's the real threat. Not that outsiders will bring violence, but that they might bring questions. For most villagers, the idea of leaving the village is as alien as the idea of flying. Travel is not a dream. It's a disruption. You are born, live and die within the same patch of dirt, surrounded by the same stone walls and the same people who will eventually carry you to your grave. Anyone who leaves without a very good reason is instantly suspicious. Anyone who comes back is even worse. They're called returners, and the village doesn't quite know what to do with them. One left 5 years ago to join a merchant's caravan. When he came back with a trimmed beard and stories about cities with buildings taller than trees, he wasn't celebrated. He was met with cautious nods and questions like, "Did the food taste strange?" And "Is it true they drink wine before noon?" He now lives near the edge of the village, next to a man who talks to chickens. Neither is invited to feasts. Fear of the foreign isn't always about outsiders. Sometimes it's turned inward, used to keep one's own people in place. Children are told that if they wander too far into the woods, they'll be taken by shadow folk. Teenagers who talk about running away are reminded of the cousin who did and was never seen again. The story ends before anyone mentions that the cousin probably started a better life somewhere else. That possibility is too disruptive. The geography of fear is mapped into everyday speech. Don't trust that road. That village cheats on grain prices. Those people don't wash. It's a form of insulation, a way to affirm identity by contrasting it with what it's not. We may be poor, but we're not thieves like them. Our children are noisy, but at least they're baptized. The church reinforces these divisions with subtle precision. The priest preaches about moral decay found in distant places, where sin flows unchecked and faith wears foreign robes. Relics from other regions are treated with suspicion. A travelling monk once claimed to possess a toe bone from St. Felix. No one believed him. "Too polished," someone whispered. "Looks like a chicken knuckle," said another. He left before nightfall. But even within the church, there's hierarchy. Monasteries from afar send messengers, and they are received with formal respect and private contempt. They speak in polished Latin, wear spotless robes, and ask complicated questions. Father Umberto always greets them with a strained smile, offers them weak wine, and makes sure they leave quickly. This resistance to outsiders bleeds into economics as well. The village has a market, yes, but it is carefully regulated. Foreign merchants must set up on the outer edges. They are charged higher stall fees. Their weights are double-checked. Their accents are mocked quietly behind hands. Giovanni the peddler once brought spices from the coast. No one bought them. Too strong, they said. Smells like something died in a church. 3 months later, a local merchant resold the same spices, watered down and renamed holy salt. They sold out in a day. Language itself becomes a border. Dialect is identity. An unfamiliar phrase can make a room go quiet. Villagers who've never travelled more than a day's walk somehow believe their version of speech is proper, while everyone else's is strange. Even Matteo, our monk, once corrected a travelling friar's pronunciation of a saint's name. The friar had studied in Florence. Matteo had studied in silence. Yet, for all the suspicion, the village still hungers for the world beyond its hedges. They gather around travellers like moths to a lantern, eager for news of famines elsewhere, wars they won't fight, diseases they hope stay far away. They ask questions in the form of warnings. Is it true the nobles in Siena eat birds with their fingers? Did you see the ocean? Is it really that big? Do women there ride horses alone? These questions aren't always met with answers. Outsiders know to be careful. Too much truth, and you become threatening. Too much mystery, and you become dangerous. The key is to speak in riddles, to share just enough to intrigue, but never enough to challenge. Giovanni once described a city where people walk on paved streets and eat honey from glass jars. No one believed him, but they still talk about it. Critically, the fear of foreigners is often just fear of difference, of change, of exposure. Because if the outside world offers more freedom, more comfort, more dignity, then what does that say about the village? If there are better ways to live, then this one might not be sacred. It might just be old. And that idea, more than any plague, storm or soldier, is the most dangerous thought of all. So the wall remains, not because it's strong, but because it's comforting. It separates not just land, but mindset. On one side, tradition, routine, control. On the other, possibility, uncertainty, challenge. The villagers know which side they were born into, and they've been told again and again that the other side isn't for them. As the sun sets, Giovanni packs his cart. He sold little, as usual, but he leaves behind something far more valuable than goods: unease. The lingering possibility that the world is larger than this field, that other lives exist beyond the bell tower. He doesn't say goodbye, just nods. The children wave. The adults do not. Chapter 9. Festivals of Fire. Joy, jealousy, and judgment. If daily life in a medieval Italian village is a grindstone, endless, circular, and dulling, then the festival is the spark that breaks the rhythm. It doesn't erase the poverty, the dirt, or the grinding repetition. But for one sacred day, it shifts the burden. The rules bend. The fire burns brighter. And everyone pretends, just for a while, that joy isn't something rationed like salt. Festivals mark feast days, saint anniversaries, harvests, and occasionally just the fact that no one has died in a week. They begin early, with the ringing of the bell, of course, longer, louder, and more forgiving than usual. Even Father Umberto allows himself a slower step, nodding to children instead of scowling. The church is decorated with wilted flowers, mismatched candles, and banners whose original colours are lost to time and smoke. It's beautiful, in the way that desperation often is. Villagers rise early to prepare, not for worship though that comes, but for spectacle. Clothing is scrubbed, stitched, and layered. The same tunic worn to dig potatoes yesterday is today adorned with a borrowed sash. Mud is scraped from boots. Hair is oiled with leftover bacon fat. Even the pigs look mildly surprised at how clean everyone suddenly seems. Alina and her mother spend the morning baking extra loaves, not for coin, but for visibility. Festivals are public auditions. Who bakes best? Who dances longest? Who sings loudest? These are the performances that define reputation. Not skill, not virtue, but spectacle. The village square transforms. Stalls become game booths. Benches become stages. Fire pits are dug and lined with stones. Chickens are tied by the leg, awaiting races they will absolutely lose. A pig, already marked for roasting, squeals as if auditioning for mercy. Children are everywhere, sticky with anticipation and fruit they were explicitly told not to touch. And then the performance begins. There is music of a kind. Drums made from stretched skin. Flutes that sound like anxious birds. A lute that's been repaired so many times it no longer resembles any known instrument. The players are half-talented and fully enthusiastic. They play loudly. And in the rare moments when the melody aligns, it feels almost like real joy. Dancing erupts soon after. Circles of villagers spin and stomp, sweat flying, hands clasped. There's a rhythm to it, though no one can agree on what it is. Old men tap their feet and mutter that it was better in their day. Young women sneak glances at boys. Boys try to appear disinterested while tripping over each other. It's clumsy, chaotic, and utterly sincere. Food is handed out. Roasted chestnuts, boiled grain, small wheels of cheese that melt too quickly in the sun. No one eats like this on ordinary days. There's no talk of rations. No whispered guilt over the last slice. This is communal indulgence, and for once, no one counts. Until tomorrow. But underneath the joy, there's a familiar tension. Because festivals aren't just about fun. They're about status, power, and judgment. Who dances with whom? Who drinks too early? Who laughs too loud? It's all noticed, catalogued, stored for later. Take Lucetta, Ronaldo's wife. She sits at the edge of the crowd, trying to enjoy herself, but aware of every glance. Her apron is patched, her sandals too worn. A wealthier neighbour passes, offering a polite smile and a second-long stare that says, "We noticed you didn't bring anything." It's all performative charity laced with silent rankings. Games are played next, sack races, balance contests, and a strange tradition where blindfolded men swing sticks at a dangling bladder of wine. It's less about winning and more about watching someone fall face first into dirt while their uncle laughs until he wheezes. Giovanni, the travelling peddler, is allowed to stay for the day. Barely. He offers ribbons and foreign sweets, small twisted candies that turn mouths purple. The children adore him. The adults tolerate him. Father Umberto watches from the church steps, wine cup in hand, making a point of neither smiling nor frowning. And then there's the judgment ceremony. Every festival has one. A ritualized, symbolic trial of someone chosen by the villagers, not for a real crime, but for amusement. One year, it was a man who always watered his vegetables at night. Another year, it was a girl who sang too loud during Mass. Today, it's Matteo the monk who once accidentally set fire to a prayer book with his reading candle. Everyone laughs. He accepts his punishment with a bow and is pelted with crumbs of old bread. It's fun, it's harmless, it's also a warning. Because while today's judgment is symbolic, everyone knows that real punishment isn't far behind. Festivals let the village release tension, but also remind it who's in charge, who belongs, who's being watched. By sundown, the fire is lit in the centre of the square, a symbol of cleansing, celebration, and community. Villagers throw in broken tools, bad harvest charms, and the odd pair of ruined shoes. Children dance around it until they collapse. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and the kind of laughter that borders on relief. But not everyone laughs. Some villagers stay near the shadows, the ones with unforgiven reputations. debts too high to forget, or past mistakes that festivals can't erase. They clap along, sip their drinks, and wait for the night to pass. Because tomorrow everything returns. The joy fades, the roles resume, the fire cools, and while the festival may pretend to equalize everyone, the ash settles unevenly. As the fire grows higher, the laughter grows louder, and the restraint thinner. Joy, in a medieval village, has a curfew. It begins bright and hopeful, but ends, more often than not, in a haze of wine, bruised pride, and mumbled apologies that no one remembers making. The wine flows freely now, poured from earthen jugs that never seem to empty until someone collapses. It's not good wine, not aged, not delicate, not even entirely grape, but it's potent. And tonight, that's all that matters. Even Father Umberto has refilled his cup. He tells himself it's for warmth, for communion with the villagers. No one questions it. A drunk priest is still a priest. As night falls, the games shift. Earlier contests of skill are replaced by contests of endurance and ego. Men challenge each other to drinking matches, arm wrestling, foot races around the fire. Someone loses a sandal, someone else loses a tooth. The winner gets a small ribbon and a large headache. The loser gets teased until spring. Old feuds start to surface, stirred by drink and proximity. Two brothers who haven't spoken since last planting season suddenly remember why. A woman slaps her cousin for spilling wine on her only clean dress. A man yells at his wife, then tries to dance it off with someone else's. No one intervenes. Not yet. This, too, is part of the ritual. Lucetta keeps to the edge, watching. She sees the village unwind with the weary gaze of someone who knows how short the release is. She sips watered wine from a clay cup, dodging glances, offering forced smiles. Ronaldo is nowhere in sight. He's likely sitting by the barrel with other men who call themselves tired but really mean bitter. Nearby, Elena's mother tries to keep up appearances. She flutters between groups, praising bread, complimenting tunics, apologizing for things no one noticed. It's exhausting. But in a village where reputation clings tighter than mud, this is the cost of survival. Her daughter, Elena, has been pulled into a dance by a boy she's known since childhood. He stumbles through the steps, laughs too loudly, and tells her she smells like flowers. She knows it's sweat and flour, but she lets it pass. It's festival talk. It doesn't count. Then the fireplay begins. A tradition as old as memory and twice as dangerous. Boys, encouraged by cheers, leap through the outer edges of the flame. Not the high centre, but where the sparks dance low. It's meant to show bravery, youth, or just foolishness. One boy trips, singes his tunic, and limps away with both pain and pride. The crowd applauds. Fire heals nothing, but it celebrates everything. The darker it gets, the freer people become. Under cover of smoke and shadow, secrets unfold. A kiss stolen behind the chapel wall. A flask passed between enemies. A merchant's wife whispering something that will be denied tomorrow. These moments won't survive the light. They aren't meant to. But tonight they bloom. And yet not all is merriment. At the edge of the square, two boys fight, not the playful kind, but sharp and angry. One insult too far, one shove too hard. A blow lands. Someone bleeds. The crowd parts like fabric torn down the middle. For a moment, the illusion of peace fractures. Then Father Umberto steps forward, not with threats, but with presence. He raises his hand. The boys freeze. One mutters an apology, the other nods stiffly. It's over, not forgiven, but paused. Because at festivals, real violence is forbidden, not out of moral virtue, but practicality. If blood spills during joy, the joy becomes cursed. And the village cannot afford cursed joy. But they also can't afford honesty. So they resume the celebration as if nothing happened. A song begins again. Feet stomp the earth, cups are raised. The fire crackles louder, as if covering the silence that followed the punch. Back at the church steps, Giovanni watches. He knows this dance too well. He's seen it in a dozen villages. This forced joy, this hunger for release. Festivals don't heal communities. They air them out. Let the bad smells out with the good. Tomorrow the resentment will still be there. But tonight at least it's decorated. As the final logs are tossed into the fire, the ashes begin to float like black snow. The crowd thins. The music fades. Children sleep where they dropped. A drunk man urinates against a wall while singing a hymn. Another man tries to climb the bell tower for perspective. He's stopped by 2 farmers and a chicken in that order. The fire is allowed to die slowly. Not extinguished, just permitted to fade. Because the festival must end on its own, like a story that stops telling itself. People drift home, arms around each other or alone, or carrying someone who won't remember the journey. The square empties. The stars blink overhead like curious witnesses. By dawn the banners will be gone, the stalls taken down, the drunken laughter a memory. The breadcrumbs, the wax drips, the wine stains, these will remain, but they won't be discussed. They're part of the pact. The festival happened. It was joyful. It was pure. No one will say otherwise. Because in a village built on ritual and repression, even joy must be curated. Chapter 10. Nightfall's grip. Shadows, spirits, and secrets. In the medieval village, day is for survival, but night is for stories, and secrets, and fear. As the last embers of the communal fire smoulder into ash, the square empties. Doors are barred, shutters are latched. The laughter from the festival dies a quiet, reluctant death. A heavy hush settles over the rooftops, as if even the moon is holding its breath. The village at night is not asleep. It is watchful. Candles flicker behind warped glass. Dogs growl low in their throats. A rooster, confused by the moonlight, crows and is immediately cursed by someone trying to sleep. The air smells of cooling earth, leftover wine, and that strange mixture of dampness and smoke that seems unique to centuries without plumbing. People here don't trust the dark. And for good reason. There's no real lighting outside. No lantern posts. No torches lining the street. If you step outside after sunset, you walk in blind trust. Feet memorizing paths, hands brushing stone walls to stay oriented. A misstep means a fall. A wrong turn means wandering. And wandering means questions. Children are taught early, darkness has rules, don't whistle, don't name what you can't see, don't look into wells at night, and never under any circumstance. Answer a knock if no one says your name. Of course, most of these are stories, passed from mouth to mouth like half-baked truths. But when enough people believe a lie, it starts to shape behaviour. And in this village, where logic bows to fear, the lie has power. Take the tale of the bell ringer's wife. She left her home one night during a thunderstorm. Said she heard a child crying. She never came back. Her husband claims she followed a fox into the woods. Others say the fox spoke. Now, when thunder rumbles, no one answers cries. Especially not from the trees. Then there's the belief in night spirits. Beings who slip between cracks in old wood and ride the wind like smoke. They steal breath from sleeping infants, curdle milk, and make dogs howl at nothing. Agnese, the midwife, keeps garlic braided above her door, not for flavour, but for protection. She also places iron nails under her pillow. Just in case, she says, you never know who's listening. But it's not just spirits they fear, it's each other. By day, the village is held together by visibility. You see who draws water, who trades at the market, who kneels during prayer. But at night, everyone is invisible, and invisibility is dangerous. It invites truth, or temptation, or both. Ronaldo, for instance, sometimes walks alone after sundown, not far, just along the fence that borders the fields. He says it clears his head, but his neighbour, a man with fewer teeth than reasons, swears he's seen Ronaldo digging. Burying something, he told Lucetta. Could be tools, could be worse. She didn't reply. Some things are safer left unconfirmed. And Elena, who stays up late kneading dough, has noticed lights near the old chapel, not the church, the other one, the ruined one, just flickers. Once she swore she saw someone kneeling in the broken doorway, unmoving for hours. She told no one, not because she feared judgment, but because she feared being believed. Night is also when sins grow legs. Affairs, deals, theft, secrets carried out under cloud cover. The miller's boy once confessed, during a late-night bout of fever, that he saw two men exchanging coin beneath the pig pen. He died 3 days later. The priest called it illness. Agnes A. called it too much truth, too fast. There are sounds, too, ones you learn to ignore. A sudden knock with no follow-up. Scratching on shutters when no wind is blowing. The distant hum of the flute no one owns. The village has agreed, unofficially, that these things don't require response. If something wants in, it will come regardless. Better not to open the door and find out. And then there's the curfew bell, an iron clang that rings out shortly after sunset. It doesn't sound like the others. It's lower, slower, final. When it tolls, everything should already be done. Animals tied, tools inside, bodies accounted for. If you're not indoors by the last ring, you are, in essence, alone, with whatever walks the roads after hours. This isn't superstition. It's practical terror. Years ago, someone didn't come home after the curfew bell, a farmer. His name's no longer remembered, just that his shoes were found outside the north gate. Still warm. The body was never recovered. The well outside his home has been dry ever since. To be outside after dark is not illegal, but it is noted. The next day, people will look at you differently. Ask different questions. What were you doing? Where were you going? Who saw you? Even silence is suspicious. But despite all this, despite the rules and the warnings, some people love the night. Matteo, the ink-stained monk, says his thoughts are clearest after sundown. He writes by candlelight, the flicker soothing, the quiet like a cathedral. He once told Giovanni that the world is most honest in darkness. Giovanni agreed. Then they both said nothing for a long time. Lucetta, too, sometimes lingers near the window when the house is still. She doesn't light a candle, she just listens. For the owl, for the fox, for the rhythm of a village exhaling. In those moments, she feels something close to peace, or at least distance from the constant noise of expectation. Because the truth is, night reveals what daylight edits. It strips the polish from performance. It whispers that the roles played under the sun aren't everything. That some truths, however small, however strange, only speak once the world goes quiet. And if you're brave enough to listen, the village tells a very different story after dark. The village at night is not silent. It breathes, groans, shifts in its slumber like an old man with too many regrets. Beneath the thatched roofs, lives twist and turn. Beds creak not just from sleep, but from dreams. Those half-formed things that flicker like candlelight before vanishing into the dark. Dreams carry weight here. They're not treated as harmless stories, but as messages, prophecies, punishments. Father Umberto once preached that God whispers in dreams what he dares not shout in daylight. That sounds poetic until you realize it's mostly used to justify waking up terrified and blaming your neighbor for the feeling. Elena often dreams of water, too much of it, rising fast, drowning the bakery and her feet with it. Her mother says it's just the body talking. Her grandmother, before she passed, would have said, it's a sign someone in the family will lose something, a goat, a ring, a secret. In this village, losing things is rarely material. Across the square, Ronaldo snores unevenly. Lucetta lies awake beside him, eyes fixed on the wooden ceiling. She listens, not just to him, but to the faint scrape of wind, the occasional cough from next door, and the strange shuffle she hears at the same time every night. It's probably a rat. Probably. But her fingers still find the iron nail under her pillow, just in case. Then there's the matter of confessions, the real kind. The ones that can't be spoken during the day, when ears are sharp and judgment even sharper. Night becomes the time for murmured truths exchanged behind doors, in whispers so quiet they risk being lost forever. A woman might admit to stealing grain. A boy might confess he no longer believes in saints. A man might say he envies his brother's wife. These things don't leave bruises, but they do damage. Giovanni, the peddler, once remarked that in some towns, night brings freedom. Here, it brings exposure. The lack of light doesn't shield, it reveals. It peels back the day's armour and forces everyone to sit with their private, unsellable truths. There's a reason why windows are so small in medieval homes, not just to keep out cold, but to keep in secrets. Wide windows would tempt curiosity, and curiosity, in this village, is a sin just shy of blasphemy. If you ask too many questions, people assume you're planning something, or hiding something worse. Even Matteo the monk, so in love with his parchment and solitude, once wrote in his journal, a thing he guards with obsessive care, that night is when I feel most honest and most watched. It's a contradiction that only makes sense if you've lived here, if you've grown used to shadows that don't behave and noises that don't repeat. But it's not all fear. There's comfort in the dark too. Agnese, the midwife, lights a candle each night not for saints, but for her mother who died birthing her. She hums the same lullaby she's sung for years, not because anyone hears, but because it's the only tune that feels true. The candle flickers. The flame is crooked. It stays. Some couples talk more at night than in daylight. They lie back to back in narrow beds and whisper memories from before marriage, before poverty, before the second miscarriage. They do not touch. They just talk. And sometimes that's enough. In the dark, pride bends. In the dark, you can admit things you can't carry past breakfast. Children, too, have their rituals. They pretend not to be afraid, but most sleep with something nearby. A smooth stone, a carved doll, a broken spoon, blessed by a grandparent long gone. These aren't toys, they're talismans. Childhood here doesn't have the luxury of innocence. It has habits, and habits become beliefs. The village dogs are the best warning system. If they bark once, it's a mouse. Twice, it's wind. 3 times, someone's out there. And if they whine, someone's already in. No one explains how they know this, they just do. And what of the chapel ruins? Elena still swears she sees light near it sometimes, dim, like a breath trying to become a flame. She hasn't told her mother, not because she fears ridicule, but because she fears validation. What if her mother nods slowly and says, then it's begun again? Because that's the quiet terror here, that nothing is ever over. The sins of the past aren't buried. They're just waiting their turn. In moments of stillness, when the village seems to truly sleep, a strange thought lingers. Maybe the world beyond the walls isn't what should be feared. Maybe it's not the foreigners, or the storms, or even the devils the priest rants about. Maybe the real fear lives in the house next door, or worse, in yourself. But these thoughts don't last long. The body gives out. The mind folds. Sleep comes like a priest's blessing, uneven, whispered, half-believed. The village sighs, and the dark keeps its secrets. Until morning. Chapter 11. The Taxman's Shadow. Debt, Power and Resentment. If religion is the village's soul and labour its muscle, then taxation is its bleeding artery. Every man, woman and child, whether they realise it or not, is tethered to a ledger held far beyond their reach. Some chalk it up to divine order. Others mutter curses under their breath every time a horse with a seal-bearing saddle crests the hill. Enter the tax collector, a figure neither fully despised nor remotely welcome. His name might change depending on who's in power, a count, a bishop, a duke, but his purpose never does. He comes with scrolls, scales, and a face that's learned how not to flinch at hunger. Giovanni once called him a man who can stare at a starving child and still demand the egg she holds. No one disagreed. His arrival is always the same. A trumpet announces him, not a joyful fanfare, but a single sour note blown by a boy who'd rather be anywhere else. Villagers pause mid-task, bread is burned, wool is dropped, conversations die mid-word. Because when the taxman enters the square, all sins become visible. He never travels alone. 2 guards flank him, not to protect him from bandits, but from bakers, co-opers and mothers with ladles. Their armour clinks with the kind of authority that doesn't need to speak, and doesn't need to understand either. He dismounts slowly, like a man who believes even the ground should pay for his step. His scroll is unrolled, names are read, debts are confirmed, and that's when the bargaining begins. It's not haggling. That implies a fair trade. This is pleading, dressed in polite language. A man might say his crop failed. The taxman will say the rain didn't fail. A woman might offer cheese instead of coin. He'll take it, then double her owed balance for the conversion. Some debts are paid in labour. That's the cruellest exchange. A week on the Lord's fields in exchange for your own plot not being seized. The irony is unbearable, working for the very man who's taking your work from you. Elena's mother always prepares early, hiding a few coins in flour sacks, tucking dried mushrooms in a pouch under her apron. She doesn't trust the taxman, not with money, not with glances. Last year, he lingered too long in front of Eleanor, asked her age, said she looked ripe for market. Her mother replied, "So does the cheese in your pack." That cost them 2 extra bushels of grain. Lucetta, meanwhile, doesn't argue. She pays what she can, and when she can't, she nods and waits. Sometimes being quiet is the only protest left. She doesn't cry, she doesn't beg. And that, oddly enough, seems to unsettle the collector more than weeping ever could. The taxman keeps records in Latin, of course. That way, even if he lies, no one can prove it. Matteo once peeked over his shoulder and noticed a miscount in Ronaldo's totals. He pointed it out. The guard stepped forward. Matteo stepped back. No correction was made. Then there are the fees that don't appear on paper. The bridge toll for crossing the creek. Even though the villagers built the bridge themselves. The salt levy, despite half the homes using ash for preservation. A market charge, even if you never sold a thing. It's as if the very act of living generates debt. And if you fail to pay, your name is marked, not in ink, but in memory. The next time your ox breaks loose or your child gets sick, help arrives slower. Doors open less. Gossip gets louder. Ronaldo, last year, delayed his payment by 2 weeks. Not out of rebellion, but because his coins went to a midwife who saved Lucetta's life. The taxman didn't care. He raised the total for late adjustment. When Ronaldo protested, the guard stepped between them, hand on blade. Nothing was said. Everything was understood. The village knows how this works. They talk about it in corners, behind laundry lines, beneath prayers. Some say rebellion would be noble. Others say rebellion is for people who still believe justice exists. Most just sigh and do the math again. Maybe this time the numbers will bend in their favour. They never do. And yet the greatest cruelty isn't the theft, it's the justification. The taxman speaks of roads, of protection, of God's order. He says the money feeds soldiers who defend them from raids, even though the last soldier anyone saw was riding away from danger, not toward it. He says the church needs coin for candles, but Father Umberto hasn't had beeswax in a year. Even the children feel it. They play games where one is the collector and the others run or hide. They don't laugh much during it. Eleanor once told a girl, "Let's play feast day instead." The girl replied, "We can't afford a feast." That ended the game entirely. By dusk the collector leaves, his scroll heavier, his coin purse full, his expression unchanged. Behind him, the village exhales like a punch has just landed. Bread is resumed. Animals fed. A silence falls over everything. One that isn't restful, but resigned. Because in a place where effort is constant and reward rare, nothing hurts quite like being told again that what little you had still isn't enough. For all the noise the taxman brings, the most powerful responses in the village are the ones spoken in whispers. Not shouts, not swords, whispers. Because here, resistance isn't loud, it's clever. You see, when every official ledger insists you owe more than you own, survival becomes an act of accounting sorcery. And no one does this better than the villagers. They've lived under lords, under bishops, under so many owners that the idea of belonging to oneself is almost foreign, but not quite forgotten. It begins with hiding things. Obvious, right? But not as simple as stuffing coins under floorboards. That's amateur work. No, the real secrets lie in sheep that are lost, then found, again after tax season. Loaves that are claimed to have burned but were in fact baked in hidden ovens beneath hay. Carts that roll in at night with wood that doesn't exist on paper. Take Eleanor's family. Officially, they bake once a week. Unofficially, her mother has a second baking stone in the smokehouse, concealed under straw. It's old and cracked and takes twice as long to heat, but it allows them to trade 6 extra loaves per week. Loaves no one counts, no one taxes. Ronaldo too has his methods. He claims his field yields barely enough to feed his goat, but one plot over, behind a line of trees, grows an illegal patch of root vegetables, planted by moonlight, harvested before dawn, sold to a travelling butcher who doesn't ask questions. Ronaldo's hands may look callous from poverty, but they're the hands of someone who's mastered the art of invisible work. Even Lucetta, quiet as she is, plays her part. She gathers herbs said to be for her own use, though half the village has tasted her healing teas. No payment changes hands, just eggs, or soap, or sometimes secrets. A cure for your cough in exchange for silence about the chicken you never reported. This system, unwritten, unspoken, is more efficient than any law. It's a barter economy powered by mistrust, not of each other, but of everyone above. The priest, for all his preaching, plays along too. Father Umberto once publicly condemned deception in dealings, then accepted a sack of potatoes in exchange for baptizing a child born 3 months too early for comfort. He didn't record the date. He never does. The Lord knows when life begins, he said, and he doesn't work for the tax office. Then there's Giovanni, who, despite being an outsider, has learned to thrive within these grey spaces. He trades in things not easily taxed, news, gossip, small luxuries. A ribbon here, a dried orange peel there. He's the master of uncounted value. He once said, "You can't tax joy if you don't know what it looks like." Then he sold a wooden flute to a boy for a single beat. Some resistance goes further. There are stories, half true, half hope, that someone once poisoned a collector's horse, that someone else switched the tax scrolls during a festival, that a former villager now lives in the hills, robbing passing lords and feeding poor farmers at night. Most people don't believe it, but they want to, and that's enough to make the stories useful, because while real rebellion is rare, it's also stupid. Everyone knows what happened in the next valley. A group of farmers refused to pay a new wheat levy. The Lord sent soldiers. The village burned. The survivors paid twice now. Resistance that's seen becomes a noose. But resistance that hides in plain sight? That survives. Still, even hidden rebellion carries risks. If someone's secret is exposed, if the wrong person sees the extra sheep, the real yield, the quiet deal punishment is swift. Fines, humiliation, confiscation, in some cases, exile. And exile here is worse than death. It means living without the network, without trust, without trade. So people tread carefully. Smiles become contracts, winks, negotiations. A shared glance across the market could mean, "I'll trade you soap for bread, or your goat's still alive, don't worry." It's all coded language, and everyone knows how to read it. Children are taught early, not just numbers and saints, but how to lie convincingly. Say you ate 3 eggs, not 4. If asked about the goat, say she hasn't given milk in weeks. Never tell anyone how many turnips we have. This isn't deceit, it's defense. It's how they survive. But over time, this system creates something deeper, something dangerous. Resentment. The kind that festers, slow and quiet. Because even as they outsmart the collectors, they never really win. They survive, yes, but they survive smaller, less secure, less certain. And resentment, when bottled, becomes corrosive. It turns neighbours into spies, friends into competitors. When someone suddenly has more eggs or a better tunic, the first thought isn't pride. It's suspicion. Did they trade with the wrong person? Did they offer something I wouldn't? Every success becomes a threat. Even Lucetta, as kind as she is, notices this shift. She sees the way people glance at her new apron. How they ask, "Lovely stitch work, did you buy that?" Or, always trailing off, always implying she knows better than to answer. Ronaldo says nothing, but she catches him counting firewood at night again and again. "Just making sure," he mutters, but they both know he's not talking about wood. The irony is cruel. The system they created to escape power now divides them in its shadow. By the time the next tax season comes, no one's surprised. The scroll unrolls. The trumpet blares. The collector frowns. And the village braces again, not just for the pain of parting with coin, but for the slow unravelling that follows. They'll survive. They always do. But survival here comes with a tax of its own, and no one ever writes it down. Chapter 12. The Count's Visit. Theatre, fear, and pretending to smile. There are few events in a medieval Italian village that stir as much chaos and forced enthusiasm as the arrival of the Count. Not because he brings gifts, not because he's beloved, but because he's dangerous, in the quiet, accidental kind of way that rich men are when they enter spaces built entirely on survival. You can smell his visit 3 days before he arrives. Literally. The stables are cleaned, and the strong, sour scent of vinegar and rosemary fills the air as every home suddenly discovers a desire to wash things. Clothing is scrubbed until the fabric whimpers. Bread is baked not to eat, but to display. The pigs are hidden. The beggars are encouraged to take a vacation. The village becomes a stage, and everyone becomes an actor. Lucetta stands at the loom for hours, weaving a new belt she doesn't need. Ronaldo sharpens his scythe even though it's the wrong season. Father Umberto rehearses his sermon 4 times in a single afternoon. Elena is forbidden from working the bakery during daylight. Her mother insists her hands are too red, too cracked, too honest. Because when the Count visits, truth is not welcome. There's a script, it's unwritten, but widely known. The Count must be greeted with a bowed head and an expression of restrained gratitude. You must look impressed, but not greedy. Clean, but not prideful. Grateful, but not desperate. It's a performance built on centuries of fear, and no one wants to be the actor who forgets their lines. He arrives on horseback, of course. Not alone. His retinue includes 3 other noblemen, a scribe who pretends to care, and a hunting dog that's better groomed than any child in the village. The Count himself is disappointing. Soft around the edges. His cloak is fur-lined, his boots absurdly clean, and his eyes scan the village the way one might inspect a chicken before purchase. The villagers clap. They're not sure why, but it feels safer than silence. He dismounts slowly, allowing his squire to hold the stirrup as if his bones might shatter without it. Father Umberto steps forward and begins his speech, praising the Count's generosity, his lineage, his commitment to the people. The Count doesn't listen. He's busy staring at a basket of apples, as if they've personally insulted him. Giovanni, ever the opportunist, steps forward and offers a silk ribbon as a token of respect. The Count accepts it, then drops it into the mud. No one reacts. It's part of the performance. Pretend it didn't happen. Pretend everything is fine. He strolls through the market square with a detached air, commenting on the architecture, which he calls quaint, and the bread, which he says smells like feet. A boy laughs too loudly. His mother slaps him. The Count doesn't notice. He's already moved on. What follows is a tour. A theatre of humility. He visits the chapel, where Father Umberto shows him a broken window, awaiting divine timing to repair. He nods, then suggests using coloured glass to improve aesthetics. The church has no money for glass. It barely has candles. But again, no one corrects him. He inspects the schoolhouse, a one-room building that technically doesn't teach but occasionally corrals children. He applauds the spirit of education while stepping over a puddle of rat droppings. The teacher, who's actually a retired scribe with arthritis, bows so low he nearly doesn't get back up. At one point the Count asks to see a peasant's home. The villagers panic. Lucetta is chosen not because her home is the best, but because it smells least offensive. She scrambles to hide the chip bowls, and line the hearth with rosemary. When the Count enters, he smiles, touches nothing, and says, "Charming." He stays less than 2 minutes. It takes her an hour to breathe again. Lunch is a feast, or at least the closest thing the village can assemble without starving themselves. Roasted roots disguised as delicacies, bread sculpted into pointless shapes, meat that mysteriously appeared from a pig no one claims to have slaughtered. The Count samples everything, eats nothing, and declares it rustically satisfying. The wine flows, not the good kind. That was gone before the last festival. This wine tastes like someone stomped grapes while contemplating revenge. The Count drinks a little, winces, and hands his cup to the hunting dog. The dog refuses it. Still, the mood lifts. The Count laughs once. Someone claps. Elena's mother nearly faints from the sheer thrill of it. For a moment, everyone relaxes. Maybe, just maybe, it's going well. And then he speaks. "I must say," the Count begins, raising his goblet, "it fills me with pride to see how cheerful you remain despite your circumstances." The word lands like a hammer wrapped in silk. Circumstances. As if poverty is a lifestyle. As if hunger is a choice. As if the cracked hands, the bent backs, the silent fears are some charming background to his noble guilt. No one responds. Not because they agree, but because what is there to say? The man with power has named the condition, and in doing so, has made it permanent. If they protest, they're ungrateful. If they agree, they're pitied. Either way, they lose. Still, Father Umberto raises his glass and says, "To the Count's continued wisdom." And everyone echoes it. Even Ronaldo, who breaks the clay cup in his hand moments later. The Count soon announces his departure. He mounts his horse with effort disguised as elegance, waves vaguely toward the chapel, and rides out with his entourage and his oblivious satisfaction. Behind him, the village collapses, not literally but in posture. Shoulders drop, faces unfreeze, words return. No one speaks ill of him, not immediately. There's too much tension, too much memory of punishments past. But Lucetta hears Elena mutter, "He smells like soap and sadness." And for the first time that day, she laughs. Because in a world where the powerful mistake suffering for charm, laughter, might be the only honest thing left. The Count may leave the village in a cloud of perfumed smugness and hoofbeats, but the real event, the one that lingers, is everything that happens after he's gone. The square doesn't erupt in rebellion. There's no cathartic outburst. No shouts, no riots, no smashed plates. That would be too clean, too theatrical. No. What the Count leaves behind is far worse, doubt. It starts small. A child asks her mother why they don't eat feasts every week. The mother doesn't answer. A man wonders aloud whether his house really is as quaint as the Count said, and if that's a good thing. Another murmurs that perhaps the Count was right, that they are cheerful, even in misery, and maybe that means the misery isn't so bad. That's the damage. Not the taxes, not the inspection, not even the humiliation. It's the way he makes them question if their suffering might be something they're supposed to be grateful for. Lucetta hears two older women talking about how nice the Count was for not pointing out the stain on the chapel wall. As if silence was charity. As if it was a gift for him to ignore the holes in the roof that everyone already pretends don't leak. Father Umberto, true to form, turns the visit into a sermon. The Lord sends trials, he preaches the following morning, but also his servants to show us we are seen. Elena stares at the floor. Her mother squeezes her hand too tightly. No one wants to be seen like that. Like a decorative barnyard animal in a nobleman's tour. Ronaldo, meanwhile, returns to sharpening his scythe, though it's still the wrong season. Not for farming, for revenge. He doesn't say anything, but he sharpens it too long, too slowly. Lucetta notices the rhythm is off. The market is subdued for days. No jokes, no flirting. Even Giovanni, usually a fountain of stories and smuggled spices, seems oddly quiet. When asked what he thought of the Count's silk gloves, he simply replies, "They'd make good bandages if torn." No one laughs. The only creature seemingly unaffected is the hunting dog, who, rumour says, left a steaming gift near the altar after his master's departure. Some call it sacrilege, others call it commentary. Still, there are those who truly believe the visit was a blessing. They say the Count smiled, didn't he? He tasted the bread. He called the children lively. That has to count for something. Perhaps, they suggest, next time he visits, he'll bring coin, or letters, or a better road. The word next time makes others wince, because there's a special kind of cruelty in pretending that this masquerade of admiration and dignity is mutual, that the Count actually saw them. He didn't. He saw a version of them, a curated display of cheerful peasants in their natural habitat, the same way one might observe exotic birds behind a fence and say how lucky they are to live so free. Lucetta, while hanging laundry, tells Elena softly, "He looked at the walls like they were a painting, not like something that keeps the rain out." And that's the thing, isn't it? Power doesn't need to lie, it only needs to misinterpret. The Count doesn't need to call them lazy or dirty. He just needs to say they're charming. It hurts more, because it implies consent, like they chose this. In the days that follow, a strange competitiveness emerges, quiet but real. Who did the Count look at longer? Who did he speak to? Who did he not notice at all? Being ignored becomes either a relief or a slight. Elena's mother insists that the Count paused at their table longer than any other. Lucetta doesn't argue. She knows what people need to believe to get through the week. Father Umberto announces that a new plaque will be hung in the chapel commemorating the Count's visit. It'll be carved from wood and painted gold. The villagers sigh. No one wants it. No one wants to be remembered for being looked at. Meanwhile, rumours spread that the Count may fund a new grain mill, that he might sponsor a festival, that he could offer land, unused fields for village expansion. These are lies, or worse, they're possibilities, which means they hurt more when they fail. Giovanni, ever the real